Chapter 494. Hey, handsome, can you buy me a drink? Just as Jiang Hai and the others were drinking there, the crowd over there also moved. A good-looking woman walked out from the crowd. In Jiang Hai's eyes, it was not a problem for her to score 70 points. She looked very much like a very famous social butterfly in the United States, called Kim Kardashian. Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment when he saw her huge upper body and buttocks. However, the makeup on her face was a bit too thick. This woman walked to Jiang Hai's side, deliberately bent her waist, revealing her Mariana seduction, and said to Jiang Hai with a seductive face. However, Jiang Hai did not pay attention to her. He knew that this woman was up to no good, so why bother with her? What? You don't want to give me face? Seeing that Jiang Hai just looked at her and did not speak to her, the woman's eyebrows raised, and the smile on her face turned into a sneer. I know you. Do I need to give you face? Hearing this woman's words, Jiang Hai snorted disdainfully and said jokingly. At the same time, his eyes were also looking at this woman. She wants to give him face? She is thinking too much. Okay. Seeing Jiang Hai's expression, the woman also smiled, and then instantly took off her skirt, and then two huge breasts, which made Jiang Hai a little dizzy, shot in front of Jiang Hai. To be honest, Jiang Hai had seen a lot of women, but this was the first time he saw such a big one. But unfortunately, this woman did not let Jiang Hai look at her for nothing. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, she could not help but smile, took off her clothes, and shouted loudly, "Please, this man is molesting me. Boy, you dare to touch my woman." Sure enough, when her voice fell, a very rough man had already pushed the crowd and walked out. As soon as he saw this man appear, Jiang Hai could not help but laugh at himself. Since Jiang Hai had the dragon balls, he had been avoiding melodramatic plots. Most of his decisions were difficult for others to guess the ending, but it turned out that this world was a melodramatic world. Sometimes, although you tried your best to avoid these, natural disasters and man-made disasters could happen at any time. A large pot of dog blood would fall from the sky and drench you, just like now. Seeing this guy, who was only about 1.7 meters tall, pushing the crowd and coming forward, Jiang Hai and Belle also looked at each other. After drinking the wine in their glass, they stood up. Boy, you want to run after taking advantage of me. Seeing Jiang Hai and Belle stand up, the small guy here waved his hand, and in an instant, more than a dozen guests in the bar also stood up, and quickly surrounded Jiang Hai and Belle in the bar. Run? I didn't think about it, but you can say what you want. Glancing at the people around him, Jiang Hai gently moved his neck and shoulders, and then said to the person in front of him with disdain. Most of the people from South America were not very tall. Of course, this was not absolute. For example, there were many insiders in the NBA who were from South America, but most of them were very short. The shortest region in the world, besides South Asia, is South America. Indeed, there are many tall basketball players, but their national sport, football, their height on the field is exposed. Jiang Hai is now 192 centimeters tall barefoot, and Belle is 188 centimeters tall. When he stood up, he looked like a crane in a flock of chickens. You molested my woman, it won't be that easy. How about I cripple your hands, or? Seeing Jiang Hai directly ask, the leader couldn't help but smile. Then he rubbed his thumb, index finger, and middle finger together. Jiang Hai looked at Jiang Hai and said, Hey, do you want money? How much do you want? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai touched his nose and said with a smile. You're quite smart, I want 20,000, no, I want $50,000. Seeing Jiang Hai take the initiative to mention money, the man's eyes couldn't help but light up, and then he said loudly. He knows that Jiang Hai is not short of money, so he has to peel off a layer of skin from Jiang Hai. He heard that Jiang Hai made nearly $43,000, so it's reasonable for him to pay $7,000. Hearing the leader's words, the dozen or so lackeys around here couldn't help but laugh. They have heard before that Americans are quite afraid of death. Are these two guys about to piss their pants? 50,000? No, 100,000. If you can't come up with $100,000 today, then I will throw you into the sea to feed the sharks. But unfortunately, they found the wrong prey. When Jiang Hai heard his words, he couldn't help but move his face closer, and then said with an evil smile on his face. What did you say? Say it again. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the people who had a smile on their faces instantly put away the smile on their faces, and the leader couldn't help but say with a ruthless face. I said, give me $100,000, or I will throw you into the sea to feed the sharks. Looking at the man in front of him, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with a serious face, but as soon as his voice fell, the man on this side had already punched him. Looking at the fist coming at him, Jiang Hai didn't dodge, and directly took the punch. Feeling the heavy blow on his cheek, Jiang Hai smiled. For times the physical limit of an ordinary person naturally meant that his resistance was 4 times the physical limit of an ordinary person. This punch didn't even leave a mark on Jiang Hai's face, let alone push him back. You can fight back now. Gently wiping his cheek, Jiang Hai smiled, then put away the phone that had been recording next to him. This was the evidence, and now that he fought back, it was called legitimate self-defense. Fight back, I think you are courting death, go. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the Puerto Rican gangster shouted and directly pounced on Jiang Hai, but what answered him was Jiang Hai's heavy punch. This punch hit the guy's face hard, and Jiang Hai almost instantly heard the sound of the nose and cheekbones breaking. And this person was also sent flying by Jiang Hai's punch. After flying for 3 or 4 meters in the air, he knocked over 4 tables and chairs in a row before lying down. At this time, he was lying there with his face covered in blood, and his whole person was stunned. Jiang Hai glanced at him and was sure that this guy's nose was definitely broken, and there was no escape from a severe concussion. However, Jiang Hai's punch didn't make the others stop. The remaining dozen or so guys, with the idea that many ants can bite an elephant to death, instantly rushed over. But soon, they realized that no matter how many ants there were, they were still just ants. Moreover, their numbers were not enough to make an elephant afraid. Before Jiang Hai moved, Bell had already moved. First, he directly swept down the person in front with a low whip kick, then he grabbed another person's arm and hit the person's temple with his elbow. This person also fell to the ground in an instant. Although he was not dead, he had lost the ability to fight. At the same time, he kicked back with his hind leg and instantly kicked another person in the stomach, causing him to retreat a few steps and kneel on the ground. He covered his abdomen with both hands and began to vomit, but the sour smell did not affect Jiang Hai and Bell. The two of them were like fierce tigers that had been released from their cages. They rushed towards the people who were still standing there. These people were actually just some gangsters. Usually, it was good enough for them to show off their strength. Now that they had met Jiang Hai and the others, they were really afraid, but it was useless to be afraid. Jiang Hai would still deal with them. Compared to Jiang Hai's strength, Bell's attacks were also very sneaky. He did not have the strength of Jiang Hai, but his skills were much better than Jiang Hai's. After all, he was the one who taught Jiang Hai how to fight. But now, Jiang Hai had a feeling that he had surpassed his master. There was no one under his command that could withstand a single move from him. In a few moves, these guys were directly beaten to the ground. One by one, they held their faces and their stomachs were constantly groaning. Jiang Hai liked to hit people in the face. Those who were beaten to the ground by him would definitely have a nose fracture. In less than 30 seconds, the originally arrogant people were all lying on the ground. Jiang Hai glanced at the blood on his hand and casually wiped it on the clothes of a gangster. Looking at Jiang Hai and Bell's ferocious fighting strength, the people in the bar who originally had some thoughts about fighting instantly withdrew their thoughts. Even a pestle had to be picked, but it was obvious that these two people were not pestles, but durians. If they directly went to deal with them empty-handed, it would definitely not be the durians who died, but themselves. Therefore, the other guests were either watching from the side or had already returned to the table to drink their wine. B*****. Just as Jiang Hai and Bell finished off these people and were about to leave, the boss slowly got up after being confused for so long. He took out a switchblade from his pocket and cursed. With a face full of anger, he charged at Jiang Hai. His face was smashed to the point that even his own mother would not be able to recognize it. His bloodshot eyes did indeed give Jiang Hai a fright, but his reaction was not slow. Before the guy could charge at him, Jiang Hai had already pulled out the big desert eagle that had been strapped to his back and aimed it at the guy. When he saw the black muzzle in front of him, the gangster leader, who had just charged halfway, froze. "If you didn't show up, would have forgotten. $100,000, or I'll throw you into the sea to feed the sharks." Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai's mouth opened slightly. He slowly walked in front of the man and pointed the gun directly at the man's head. Indeed, Jiang Hai did not dare to kill people here, but it did not mean that he would easily let this guy go. Chapter 495. I didn't. Feeling the cold muzzle pointing at his head, the gangster's eyes, which were just blinded by money, became clear again at this time. There was no one who was not afraid of death, but some people died for their beliefs, such as our beloved soldiers, in order to protect the country, in order to protect the homeland. These people's sacrifice was glorious and heavier than Mount Tai. But some people, such as these gangsters, were just brave and ruthless. When they knew that they couldn't beat the other party and were about to die, they were very scared. Now was not the era where they shouted that they would be a hero again after 18 years. In that era, bandits also had to pay attention to a name, such as enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, robbing the rich to help the poor, and so on. Now, this gangster was just jealous of Jiang Hai and wanted to take advantage of him. But they obviously underestimated Jiang Hai's combat power, and they didn't expect Jiang Hai to have a gun. No? Then it's difficult. How about this, according to what you just said, $100,000, or I want both of your hands. Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai was still smiling at first, but in the end, his face became serious. This. Now, this person really didn't dare to resist, he was really scared. Suddenly, he saw the woman beside him who was already trembling in fear. He remembered that Jiang Hai just took a look at the woman's plump upper body. This woman was indeed his lover, but at this time, he couldn't care so much. I'll give her to you, she's yours, you can do whatever you want. Thinking of this, the man directly pulled the woman over and stuffed her into Jiang Hai's arms, looking at Jiang Hai with a face full of desire, hoping that Jiang Hai was a pervert. I really don't like her, but forget it. She can take one of your arms, what about the other one? Looking at the huge woman in his arms, Jiang Hai was disgusted at first. He wouldn't do that with such a woman. After all, she had been with such men before. Who knew if she had some kind of disease in her body? But after thinking about it, it wouldn't be bad if he changed the way he played. Thus, he continued to point the gun at the man. If this woman was one of his arms, what about the other? I understand. Looking at the gun Jiang Hai pointed at his head, the man gritted his teeth. He picked up the dagger in his hand and stabbed it into his left arm. Blood spurted out in an instant, and he fell to the ground in pain. Looking at this person's resolute appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be shocked. It seemed that this guy was really a ruthless person. Scram! But the words were said by Jiang Hai, and he can't kill these people here. After all, Puerto Rico has its own government and laws, and it has a relationship with the United States. If he killed people and extradited them, then Jiang Hai would be in trouble. In order to avoid more trouble, Jiang Hai didn't plan to do anything to the tiger when he made a show of force. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the gangster immediately got up and left quickly with a dozen other people. Boss, are you taking her back to the ship? Seeing these people leave, Biyao walked over with a smile on his face. He glanced at the girl in Jiang Hai's arms and carefully asked Jiang Hai. Although Biyao wasn't a good person, he wasn't a good person. But he knows that he can't touch any woman that Jiang Hai likes. He doesn't want to lose this good job. But looking at this woman, to be honest, in his opinion, except for combat weapons, she doesn't seem to be Jiang Hai's cup of tea. Back to the ship. How is that possible? You continue to drink, and then send the wine back to the ship. Let's go out for a walk. Indeed, this woman is not Jiang Hai's cup of tea, but he won't refuse, occasionally eating fast food outside. After talking to Belle, Jiang Hai signaled with his eyes. Although the woman is still very scared at this time, her trembling body has been suppressed. She slowly moved her body and followed Jiang Hai out of the bar. Opposite the bar, there is a small town hotel. Jiang Hai and her walked in naturally. After booking the best room in the hotel, Jiang Hai took her in. Do you want to take a bath? Walking into the room, Jiang Hai asked the woman. Up to you. The woman has already known her ending at this time. Serving a man, she has done such a thing before. Her heart has gradually calmed down. In her opinion, as long as she serves Jiang Hai well, it is estimated that Jiang Hai will not embarrass her. After all, he has just let those guys go, so he shouldn't want her life. Then let's go together. Seeing that she has gradually calmed down, Jiang Hai also said casually. His voice fell. The woman over there has taken off the outer long skirt. He has to admit that this woman is really wild. She doesn't wear anything under the long skirt, and the pants below are actually lace panties. Now there is a popular knowledge, maybe everyone knows that the origin of panties is in South America. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, the woman quickly took off her clothes, then lowered her head and looked at Jiang Hai shyly. Jiang Hai was not polite. After taking off her clothes, he took her into the hotel bathroom. When the bathtub was filled with water, the two were also taking a shower. When she saw the existence of Jiang Hai, she licked her lips subconsciously. What kind of ability is there in the world? Brazilians are ranked first in the world. They are all South Americans. Other countries may not be so terrible, but they are not bad either. The same is true in Puerto Rico. Before today, this woman only heard that Asian men are not very good in that aspect, but when she saw Jiang Hai, she found that she seemed to have gained something. Under the signal of Jiang Hai's eyes, she slowly squatted down. Her mouth and Jiang Hai's favorite panties also came in handy at this time. When Jiang Hai returned to the ship, it was already past 9 o'clock in the evening. Seeing that Jiang Hai was back, although Delina and Marion did not say it explicitly, they were both relieved. Boss, you are so slow. Belle, the only one who knew what Jiang Hai was going to do, watched Jiang Hai get on the ship and couldn't help but laugh. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at him, then quickly walked over. Well, everyone go to sleep. I think Belle has also told you that we may be targeted, so we can't stop here tonight. If something happens, we can't even run away, so I decided to stop at sea for the night. My only request tonight is that you must all stay in the room, and never come out without my order. Looking at the several people in front of him, Jiang Hai said seriously. He was not going to delay for too long. Tonight, he was going to retrieve the sunken ship that he had his eyes on. That was his main goal. Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone here responded. Although they didn't know what Jiang Hai was going to do, no matter what Jiang Hai wanted to do, they had to obey. With everyone's response, Jiang Hai also walked into the captain's room, started the engine, and drove towards the depths of the sea. As for Belle and others, after packing up, they took their food and drinks and returned to their rooms. Only Azalina watched everyone enter their rooms, then returned to Jiang Hai's captain's room. As soon as she walked in, Jiang Hai noticed her and immediately turned off the navigation on his mobile phone. Is there anything else? Looking at Azalina, Jiang Hai turned his head and asked curiously. But as soon as his voice fell, Azalina had already stepped in front of Jiang Hai. She didn't give Jiang Hai any chance to resist at all. Her mouth kissed Jiang Hai's lips, and her tongue officially invaded his lips. Jiang Hai was stunned at first, but fortunately, he quickly reacted and began to fight back. But just as he fought back, Azalina stepped back, then licked her lips gently. There's no strange taste in your mouth. It seems that you haven't kissed anyone, but that's not right. Judging from Bale's appearance just now, you should have gone looking for food. Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina said with some hesitation. In terms of combat effectiveness, Azalina and Biyao are about the same. Although Azalina's skills are better, her physical fitness makes her a little disadvantaged when facing Biyao. But when it comes to other things, Azalina is much better than Biyao. Psychology, action, interrogation, reconnaissance, wilderness survival, and so on. She is better than Biyao in all aspects, let alone Zhang Hai. So when he heard her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile awkwardly. I came here to tell you that the key to my room is under your pillow. Don't always go outside, it's dangerous and dirty. Since I'm your bodyguard, I have the obligation to protect your safety, including here. Looking at Zhang Hai's slightly embarrassed face, Azalina knew that her judgment was right. Then, she rolled her eyes at Zhang Hai and said, "This guy is really interesting. He has such good quality women at home, but he still wants to go outside to play. He's crazy." After giving Zhang Hai one last squeeze, Azalina wandered back to her room. Looking at her figure, Zhang Hai couldn't help but touch his nose. Wait until I have time. He also knew that Azalina was right. It's not a good idea to always go looking for food. Moreover, there are many women around him who can help him, but most of them are difficult for Zhang Hai to cross the threshold in his heart. Take Aphrodite and the others for example. After all, they used to. So they can't do it. And Delina and Marion are his daughters. They should be able to do it with Clive, but now the problem is that there are some uncertainties with Clive. Therefore, Zhang Hai was also a bit depressed. When he was depressed, time passed by quickly. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed by. At this time, the ship's bell rang. He knew that he had arrived at his destination. Chapter 496. Plop. With a splash, Zhang Hai entered the water again. As the bubbles around him gradually disappeared, Zhang Hai also turned on the headlamp in front of him, then he swam quickly towards the deep sea. Zhang Hai was familiar with doing this. After all, he had gone to the sea twice last time. He was very familiar with the activities in the sea. He didn't plan to get the treasures in the water in one day. He went down today to check it out. If there was not much in this ship, then there was no need for him to take it. He was wearing the thickest protective swimsuit with an iron wire net on the outside. He carried 2 fishing guns on his back and an underwater pistol, which he had specially brought along. Other than that, there was also a metal bag used to store samples. After upgrading to a dragon, Zhang Hai really found that he had changed a lot. In addition to the physical fitness that he said at the beginning had become 4 times the human limit, his spiritual sensitivity had also increased greatly, and the release of spiritual energy were his new abilities. However, what Zhang Hai was most concerned about was his ability to move underwater. In his manner, he had already tried it. After going into the water, he still didn't need to breathe and ignored the water pressure. The most important thing was that his body, which was originally slow underwater, was now like an underwater dragon at this time. Although it was still not as good as the swimming masters like sailfish and tuna, it shouldn't be slower than the average boat. For example, tuna, the fastest speed of this fish can reach 160 kilometers per hour. Of course, the speed won't be maintained for long. After all, fish are cold-blooded animals. If the blood is too hot, it will burst the blood vessels. But even so, the cruising speed of this fish is about 60 to 80 kilometers per hour. According to the calculation, 1 nautical mile is about 1.8 kilometers, which means that it can swim about 33 nautical miles per hour. This speed is no slower than Zhang Hai's yacht at full speed. It beats almost 90% of the ships. Even warships are rarely so fast. If it was during World War II, this speed would almost beat the Earth in seconds. Zhang Hai's current speed is far from so fast, and his cruising speed can't be compared. He can swim about 10 nautical miles per hour at full speed, but this is already very fast. 1 nautical mile is 1,800 meters. Zhang Hai can swim 18,000 meters per hour while ignoring the water pressure. Even the Mariana Trench is not so deep. This is not slow for Zhang Hai. He dived into the water. With his current perception, physical fitness, swimming speed, and most importantly, his weapon, unless he encounters some unknown creatures, ordinary sharks are really not his opponents. Even if there is something he can't handle, don't forget, he can release spiritual energy, and he can forcibly take the other party as his underling. Therefore, Jiang Hai's speed after entering the water is extremely fast. In less than half an hour, he has already arrived at the location of his target. Under the illumination of his headlamp, a shabby Spanish galleon like a ghost ship appeared in front of him. In the history of Europe, from 1500 years ago, it can be regarded as the era of the village chief's hegemony. Because the whole of Europe is not very big, there are only a few people in total. Today, you fight me, and tomorrow, I fight you. The relationship is also somewhat intricate. It is somewhat like the period before the Qin dynasty in the earliest Wuxia. During the period of hegemony, there are many marriages between each other. Today, you fight one family, tomorrow, you fight another family. It is very chaotic. However, after 1500 years, Columbus turned everyone's attention to the distant American continent. From then on, the original hegemony of the village chief has become the strongest existence in the world who has the most colonies in the world. The strongest of the first generation is the Spanish. It is not because the Spanish are very powerful, but because they have mastered a kind of sailing technology. This kind of sailing ship is called the Spanish galleon. This ship is the second strongest ship in the world at that time. The only ship that is stronger than this ship is Huaxia's Jinghe treasure ship. However, the Huaxia people are not interested in the expedition to Europe. During the Ming dynasty, except for Zhu Di who has some interest in overseas, the following emperors are not interested in Europe and the world. Instead, they are more interested in immortal cultivation, alchemy, and carpentry. Of course, this may be because they have no choice. Because in the Ming dynasty, although the emperor is the unified monarch, he himself does not have much power. Some are like the current constitutional monarchy of the United Kingdom, where all the power is controlled by the cabinet. For example, the famous Zhang Zhuzheng and others are actually like Prime Minister Cameron of that era. In fact, they have the final say in the Ming dynasty. They can ignore or reject the emperor's words. It is precisely because of this that there are more eccentric emperors in the Ming dynasty, and the main theme of that era is Qingzhou Confucianism. These officials didn't have any sense of crisis. What they paid attention to was the eight-legged ethics and the like. Therefore, they have no idea about expanding overseas. This also caused Huaxia to miss the second opportunity to rise. Of course, this is all in hindsight. Who knows what will happen if Huaxia really launches an attack? But it is undeniable that the reason why the Spanish dominated Europe for 200 years is because of their ship, the Spanish galleon. It can be said that before the appearance of the steam engine, this ship is a giant on the sea. It has a strong load capacity, strong wind, strong defense, and fast running. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is today's aircraft carrier. At that time, almost all the pirates were proud of a Spanish galleon. At this time, in front of Jiang Hai, is a Spanish galleon. The owner of this ship is not the Spanish government at that time, but a pirate. Bartholomew Roberts. Speaking of this name now, 11 out of 10 people may not know who this person is. However, 300 years ago in the Caribbean region, it could be said that in the entire Europe, there was no one who did not know him. Because he is also a legend. Roberts was born in 1682 and died in 1722. He only lived for 40 years. But in these 40 years, he became famous. He first worked as a sailor on an armed slave ship. The business he did was not good. His main job was to transport slaves from Africa to mine gold or grow cocoa. But later, he was robbed by pirates. After being robbed, the pirates wanted to kill him. This made him very scared, so he told the pirates not to kill him. He wanted to join the pirates, and the pirates also need to replenish their manpower, so he agreed. This guy was also very smart and slowly made a name for himself among the pirates. Until he joined a pirate named Davis. When he was in Africa, he was killed by the natives. He killed his way out, and finally became the captain. His first battle as the captain was when they quietly came to the coast of Brazil and attacked a Portuguese fleet with 42 ships. The victim would never have thought that he would be robbed in such a large fleet. When he came back to his senses, he had already escaped with 40,000 Brazilian gold coins. This was also a reassurance to his men. Later, his pirate team grew bigger and bigger. At its peak, there were more than 400 ships, but it was because he was too strong. Furthermore, he did not have the backing of the government. This caused public anger in the Caribbean Sea. In the end, in the morning of 1722, he was attacked by his own country, England. He was hit by shrapnel and died on the spot, ending his sinful life. The reason why he was remembered was mainly related to his style. This guy was particularly shameless and sour. He usually liked to wear a black suit and wear jewelry all over his body. He never drank and liked to drink tea. The most important thing was that he believed in Christianity. Not only did he believe in it, but he also let his men believe in it. He even organized a church band. Although he always wanted to let the people of the church become pirates, the people of the church would not do it. He did not succeed until he died. And according to the current saying, he was full of flavor, especially good at pretending, and especially sour. It was precisely because of his style that people gave him the nickname Black Baronet. The ship that Jiang Hai was targeting today was his ship, but it wasn't his flagship. It might be a big ship or something like that. It was just a ship that was accidentally sunk when he came to South America to fish for money. According to the map that Jiang Hai bought, there were a lot of treasures hidden on this ship, but it was not clear if there were any left. Looking at the giant ship in front of him, according to the description at that time, it was indeed a giant ship. Jiang Hai slowly leaned over and gently grabbed the edge of the ship, then slowly turned over and jumped on. He had to admit that this ship was well protected here. Unlike the last ship that Jiang Hai saw, which was badly rotten, this ship basically maintained its original appearance. It was not stuck in the trench, but fell directly to the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea here was only so deep. After Jiang Hai turned over and got on the ship, he deliberately stomped his feet. The deck of the ship was indeed shaking, but it did not break. It seemed that the wood of this ship was really rare. It was more than 300 years, and it had not rotted to the roots. It was really not easy. After confirming that there was no problem with the ship, Jiang Hai also took out his weapon. Holding the spear gun with both hands, he slowly walked down to the bottom of the ship. Although there were many buildings on the top floor, it was obvious that there was no treasure that Jiang Hai wanted. There was a tattered wooden sail that had long rotted away, and a small house that had long been broken into pieces. There was nothing to see. Slowly walking to the stairs, Jiang Hai first threw a light stick down. In an instant, a lot of fish were scared away by the light thrown down by Jiang Hai. However, these fish were just some small fish that Jiang Hai had seen last time. Chapter 497. In fact, there were many creatures in the deep sea, especially fishes and eels. If you look at them carefully, you will feel that these guys are terrifying, but if you zoom in to look at them, they are just ordinary. Because they are located in the deep sea, these fishes have particularly good eyesight, and sunlight can't shine in here. Therefore, these fishes' eyes are unusually big to capture light sources. Their mouths are also unusually big, so they look like monsters, but who would catch them and look at them carefully? At least, Jiang Hai didn't have such an idea. He went to the second floor of the cabin. Just like the cabin that Jiang Hai encountered last time, the second floor is the first floor under the plate armor. This is where the sailors live. Although this ship is not as old as the previous one, it is almost 100 years less, and it is relatively well preserved. Jiang Hai threw a light stick into each room. After making sure that there was nothing left, he would enter. After a brief search, he would leave. This floor really didn't have much profit, only a few gold coins. Jiang Hai had no choice but to throw a light stick into each room. Jiang Hai threw a light stick into each room. After confirming that there was nothing left, he would enter. After a brief search, he would leave. This floor really didn't have much profit. After reaching the end of the second floor, Jiang Hai went down to the third floor. The third floor is where the treasures are. Generally speaking, if a Spanish galleon is a merchant ship, it has the lowest configuration, 2 layers of plate armor. But generally, after becoming a pirate ship, it will have 3 or even more layers. Jiang Hai doesn't know how many layers it has at most. But at least the ship in front of him has 3 layers of plate armor. The third floor is where the treasures are placed. It is also the place with the best protection. After Jiang Hai walked to the end of the second floor, he found that the third deck is actually closed. It seems that when the ship sank, the exit was not opened. Jiang Hai used his own strength to open the exit, but as soon as he opened it, some wood chips and some dust-like things rushed up in an instant. Dodging the dust that has accumulated for many years, Jiang Hai waited for the water to clear again before walking to the entrance of the third floor. Jiang Hai threw down a glowing stick, but as soon as he threw it down, a layer of fine goosebumps instantly appeared on his scalp. Because at this time, there were countless human skeletons at the entrance of the third floor, after being soaked in seawater for so many years. Most importantly, although the third deck was isolated from the fishes and the like, the insects on the third deck certainly wouldn't let go of these bodies. At this time, all of these people had their mouths wide open. Their empty eyes were staring at the exit of the third deck. Jiang Hai couldn't help but imagine what would happen next. It was very likely that the fourth floor of the ship, which was the water storage, was hit by the cannonball, and then the ship sank. And these pirates were very likely originally guarding here, or wanted to take advantage of the sinking ship to make a fortune and then escape. However, they didn't know who blocked the exit to the third floor. Before they could escape, they were locked up here. The water directly flooded in and drowned them all. From their open mouths, it could be seen that they were drowned. Looking at the dozens of complete skeletons below, Jiang Hai took a deep breath. Although looking at the scene in front of him, he was a little panicked. How can you catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? So Jiang Hai slowly walked down from the second deck. After gently kicking away the skeletons piled up on the stairs with his feet, Jiang Hai walked into the third deck. The layout of the third deck was somewhat similar to the pirate ship Jiang Hai entered last time. Unlike the second floor, there were many cabins and the like. At this time, there were only 2 huge rooms. According to the rules of the last time, Jiang Hai first opened one. As a result, after the fluorescent stick went in, he found that there was nothing special here. There were only a small mountain of gold coins and some jewels pushed there. In the other room, Jiang Hai was looking forward to it a little. He also hoped that he could get a pile of treasures like the last time, but unfortunately, there was nothing here. It was also a small mountain of gold coins and jewels. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai sighed a little. This time, there was nothing like the king's armor, which proved that the income was reduced. But then he shook his head. Although there was no big profit, if he could sell these things, it should be worth a lot of money. At least it could be worth about 500 million. This time, Jiang Hai didn't prepare to leave with just one ship. One ship was 500 million, 2 ships would be 1 billion. The only thing he needs to pay attention to now is whether his yacht can hold so many treasures. There is also the problem of sales. Of course, he still asked Moses Adams to contact the auction house. Jiang Hai won't cooperate with others to do this business. It's not like he can't do it himself. There is no need to look for partners and share their money. After recollecting his mind, Jiang Hai took his bag. After filling it with treasures, he returned to the ship. The things he packed were not without a goal. He will still be here for a few days. It's impossible to get the treasures here on the ship today. In case he encounters some intentional robbers or the American Coast Patrol, it will be easy to get into trouble. If it's only a small amount, then he can say that he bought it. After all, he is a local tyrant. But if it's a large amount, then there is no way to explain it. So he has to prepare all these things. He will come back to get these things on the ship and then bring them back to the United States. The things he packed now are more representative of these things, such as some gold coins, some jewelry, and so on. After he takes these things, he will appraise them to see how much they are worth and estimate the value of the pirate ship. After taking the things, Jiang Hai returned to the plate armor. Then, with a kick of his legs, he instantly rushed to the sea level. After his figure left, behind the ship, a huge figure slowly floated over. Then looking at the deck passage that has been opened, this huge figure actually went directly into the deck entrance that looked much smaller than it. It seems that the next time Jiang Hai comes, there will be a guest waiting for him. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't feel that at this time, because he was already swimming quickly to the sea level. After swimming for about 30 minutes, Jiang Hai's head came out of the water again. Looking at the still calm yacht in front of him, Jiang Hai quietly climbed onto the ship and then went into his room. After changing everything, he also threw the bag he took out on the floor. Then he called Delina and Marian, and the three of them studied it together. This time, the gold coins Jiang Hai brought up were still Spanish gold coins. After all, Spain was the king of the world at that time. So, the gold coins they produced were very versatile and valuable, just like dollar was now. It was far from being comparable to the gold coins of England and France. Of course, it was different after the 18th century. There were no gold-producing countries in South America. There were only silver-producing countries here, such as Chile and Peru, which were rich in silver. Compared to South America, the United States was a gold-producing country. There was also the famous South Africa. Of course, there was also Wuxia. Wuxia's gold production was currently the highest in the world, but the country had already started to mine it in a limited way. After all, if they kept mining like this, they would run out sooner or later. After cleaning up these things, Jiang Hai took out his camera and took some photos of these things from different directions. Then he sent these photos to Moses Adams via satellite. Although it was midnight, Moses Adams was still a very good professional lawyer. Moreover, he also knew that working for Jiang Hai naturally had its benefits. After receiving these photos, he immediately used his connections. He went to find some experts to appraise Jiang Hai's things. Later, the experts confirmed that the gold and silver coins Jiang Hai took were indeed Spanish gold coins, and the gems were about the same quality as the gems from last time. According to the experts' estimates, Jiang Hai's gems were worth about $1 million. When he received the news, it was almost dawn outside, but Jiang Hai was still very energetic. He calculated in his heart. The things he took were about 1% of the value of a room. These things were worth more than $1 million, so the things in one room were worth about $100 million. 2 rooms meant $200 million. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai smacked his lips in disappointment. But in any case, having money was better than nothing. He had originally thought that the things on this ship would be worth at least $500 million, but now it seemed that he had taken it for granted. Of course, this was only the estimate of the experts. According to Moses Adams, if these things were sold to an auction house, the price would increase by 20 or 30%. It would definitely increase by 20% to 30%. But even so, 200 million was only between 240 million and 260 million. Jiang Hai's heart was now big. Although money was just a bunch of numbers, he still hoped to get more numbers. After hiding the gems, Jiang Hai restarted the engine and headed for the town from last night. At the same time, he also took a nap in the captain's cabin. By the time he returned to the town, it was already past 7 in the morning. Kevin and the other 2 girls had been waiting here for a long time. At first, they thought that Jiang Hai and the others had run away. But they were unwilling to go back just like that, so they waited here for a while. It was precisely because of this wait that they saw Jiang Hai and the others. As soon as they saw Jiang Hai's yacht approaching, they excitedly waved their hands. "Girls, where are we going today?" As the yacht approached the port, Jiang Hai went to wash his face and walked up to the plate armor. Looking at the 4 girls in front of him, Jiang Hai asked them with a smile. Chapter 498. Let's go catch lobsters today. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl here said with a smile. Obviously, they didn't go into the water yesterday, which made them feel a little regretful, but if they go fishing for tuna, they will be attacked, but if they go to catch lobsters today, it doesn't matter. Catch lobsters? Hearing their words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then his brow frowned slightly. What's so fun about this? He caught this thing almost every day in the manor, and he has lost interest in it. Yeah, the lobsters in the Caribbean are still very good. You can catch them and try them, but the price is very low, unless you can get the king shrimp. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin and the others here were very excited. Well, let's get on the boat. Looking at their excited look, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He suddenly remembered that he didn't really come here to play, he came here to make money. Since they said that they want to catch lobsters, then let's go. Not yet, we have to buy some scuba tanks first, like this, otherwise, you won't be able to get off the boat. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin shook her head, then took out a pair of diving goggles from the bag and put on a small respirator. Of course, they can't really go down with an oxygen tank. Their so-called scuba tank can be said to be a small oxygen tank. It's not right to call it an oxygen tank because it contains air, and it can be breathed a dozen times in the mouth. In this way, people can stay underwater for about 10 minutes. If it's someone with a large lung capacity, it's not a problem to stay underwater for 15 or 6 minutes. Of course, if it's pure oxygen, it's also possible to stay underwater for 20 minutes. However, although Puerto Rico belongs to the United States, it's not as easy to buy oxygen here as in the United States. In fact, even in China, oxygen tanks are not expensive, but if you want to get oxygen, it's not easy to get it unless you're sick or know someone. Jiang Hai's boat naturally has no oxygen, but he is also quite interested in this scuba tank. Although he doesn't need it, he still has to pretend in front of others. Hearing Kevin's words, Jiang Hai asked the people behind him who had woken up who wanted to go into the water. Finally, it was determined that only Belle and Harriman, who were not interested in water, would stay on the boat. The rest of the people would go into the water, so Jiang Hai went to buy 4 scuba tanks and returned to the boat with the 4 girls. It was still Kevin who led the way. Jiang Hai and the others also rushed all the way to the place where they caught the lobsters. On the way, Jiang Hai also listened to Kevin's introduction of the lobsters here. He also had some understanding of the lobsters here. In China, besides the domestic lobsters, there were also different grades of lobsters. The lobsters with the best quality were the Australian lobsters. Australian lobsters were the best in terms of quality, weight, and taste. Therefore, in China, Australian lobsters were the most expensive. Of course, Australian lobsters were also divided into different types such as green dragon, flower dragon, and so on. The prices were also different, so there was no need to break them down here. In addition to Australian lobsters, there was also a lot of Boston lobsters in China. The small ones were naturally not very expensive, around 100 renminbi per kilogram, but the big ones were not cheap. It was only a little cheaper than Australian lobsters. Otherwise, if Jiang Hai's lobsters were sold for $3,000 per lobster, the tourists would have already gone crazy. After that, there was the Caribbean lobster. The scientific name of the Caribbean lobster should be Caribbean spiny dragon, which was a type of spiny lobster. It was very common in the sea, because Australian lobsters were also in this family. However, although the Caribbean lobster was a distant relative of the Australian lobster, it was much cheaper than Australian lobsters. But this thing was much cheaper than an Australian dragon. In a restaurant, a 2-kilogram Caribbean spiked dragon could be sold for €10 or $12. Here, the price was calculated by the dollar, not the kilogram. Lobsters that were 3 to 4 kilograms were all priced at this price. The fishermen here were too lazy to catch lobsters that were less than 3 kilograms. Because the Caribbean region, such as Cuba and Panama, was in a very primitive state. They did not have much of an industrial society, so there were very few people who ate lobsters here. Basically, no one specially went to catch lobsters. Only tourists would eat them, but there were not many tourists here. This place was not as peaceful as imagined, so those who dared to come here were either brave or new people. After all, these people were very few, so the sea here was not destroyed on a large scale. The number of lobsters was less in coastal areas, but there were still a lot in some uninhabited areas. After listening to Kevin's introduction, Jiang Hai touched his chin. To be honest, he had never eaten lobsters before. When he ate lobsters, his first meal was Boston lobsters, which were the lobsters with big pincers. The Caribbean spiny dragon was the kind of lobster without big pincers. He had never eaten this kind of lobster before, so he wanted to try it this time. While driving the boat, Jiang Hai looked at other maps. He wanted to see if there were any shipwrecks near the sea area mentioned by Kevin. As a result, he really saw one, but it was a little far away. Because catching lobsters was destined to not be able to go too deep into the sea, even people couldn't bear it. And with the depth that people can dive, with the current technology, it was very easy to pull up a sunken ship. Jiang Hai's goal this time was about 40 nautical miles east of the place where he caught lobsters. It was not far, so he could come and take a look at it at night. Driving the boat, Jiang Hai looked at the sea while paying attention to his coordinates. After arriving at the sea area specified by Kevin, Jiang Hai also stopped the boat. As the boat stopped, everyone ran out of the cabin. When they came out, Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up. Not only did the 4 girls change into bikinis at this time, because the water was not very deep, so it wasn't very cold, so they didn't need to wear thick clothes such as diving suits. An ordinary bikini was enough, and Jiang Hai had already seen the bikini swimsuit show of the 4 of them yesterday. Now he was looking at Delina and Marion. They were naturally not the main focus, but Azalina. Azalina was indeed a legendary Eastern European and Soviet girl. When Jiang Hai first saw her, his first impression was that she was thin, but later on, his impression was that she was strong, but now she looked really attractive. Her white and tender skin, long blonde hair, high nose, and deep blue eyes formed an 80% face. In addition, she had stayed with Jiang Hai for so long, and she also ate Jiang Hai's beef and fish every day. Her body had already recovered to its peak state, and the streamlined muscles on her slender legs looked very beautiful. That perfect V-line and 8-pack abs, a slender waist that was narrower than an A4, and 2 long, straight legs. What's more, the dark blue bikini on her body was really tempting. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze lingering on her, Azalina couldn't help but smile. This was also a good thing. Jiang Hai looked at the 3 girls in front of him and said seriously, "Well, let's get ready to go into the water. But after going into the water, you must listen to me. You must not be too far away from me, and don't touch anything." Jiang Hai looked at the 3 girls in front of him and said seriously, "Of course." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delina and Marion immediately responded. They had dived in Jiang Hai's manner before, so they naturally knew that it was actually very dangerous underwater. There were many poisonous animals, so they had to be careful. What's more, they were in a very strange sea area, so they had to be more careful. "Then let's go." Seeing that everyone was ready, Jiang Hai repeatedly told them what to pay attention to, then nodded and jumped into the sea first. After looking around the sea and confirming that there were no other harmful organisms in the water such as sharks, Jiang Hai also made an okay gesture towards above. Closely after that, they all jumped into the sea. After entering the water, people who have dived before know that it takes a certain amount of time to adapt. Although Jiang Hai and the others didn't dive very deep, the water pressure was still very uncomfortable, so they needed a little bit of time to adapt. Therefore, they circled about 2 meters below the water surface for a few times. After about 5 minutes, they resurfaced and filled with air again. After that, they officially dived to the bottom of the sea. When they reached the bottom of the sea, Jiang Hai smiled. As the bubbles in front of him disappeared, a perfect coral reef appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had always been a little depressed, because he also had coral reefs, but most of them were gray. It was the most common coral. It looked quite spectacular, but it was not beautiful. It was not like what he saw now. It was really beautiful. The corals in the tropical sea could be said to be one of the most beautiful scenes in the world. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people diving in Australia's Great Barrier Reef every year. Although the Caribbean Sea wasn't as famous as the Great Barrier Reef, it also had its own flavor. Jiang Hai glanced over and saw a large piece of coral, but compared with his own gray coral, this one was much more beautiful. Purple, yellow, pink, colorful, all kinds of corals appeared in front of Jiang Hai. There were even a lot of red corals, which were quite valuable in China. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sigh. It was indeed a tropical sea area. It was much better than his own cold sea area. On these corals, there were many sea anemones and the like. Many of them were like clownfish, butterfly fish, and the like. They shuttled back and forth among these sea anemones, and some other creatures were also wandering around. It was a perfect ecological environment. Chapter 499. Standing there, Jiang Hai kept looking at the underwater scenery in front of him. Although the underwater scenery in Jiang Hai's manner was not bad, it was still inferior. But compared to this place, it was indeed much worse. At least this place could be sold as a tourist attraction. As for his place, hee. Not to mention selling it as a scenic spot and opening it to others for free, if he didn't allow people to catch fish, no one would go there. However, no matter what, Jiang Hai still had to think of some ways to make his underwater fishery more beautiful. It seemed that he would have to waste a lot of spiritual energy again. At this time, he found that Kevin and the others who had dived into the water had returned. He glanced at his watch. It turned out that he had been in a daze for about 10 minutes, and Delina and the others had also returned. Seeing that each of them was carrying 2 big lobsters in their hands, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Looking down, sure enough, there were many big lobsters crawling in the crevices of the coral reef. Seeing this, Jiang Hai shrank his body and instantly swam straight into the crevices under the sea. Seeing Jiang Hai's speed, although Jiang Hai didn't swim at his fastest speed, Kevin and the others were still shocked. Jiang Hai's swimming speed was too fast. Even some old fishermen couldn't swim faster than Jiang Haiyu. If Jiang Haiyu were to participate in the Olympic Games, he would definitely win a medal. In fact, they didn't know Jiang Hai well. If Jiang Hai wanted to, he could win anything, let alone a medal. Almost turning his body, Jiang Hai dived into the coral reef in a short time. After catching 2 of the biggest lobsters he saw, he quickly rose up about 3 meters. After wandering for a while, he got on the boat. Of course, he didn't need to wander there. He did this just to make Kevin and the others feel more at ease. When he got on the boat, Belle and Harriman had already prepared the boxes, and the lobsters were also caught by them. Looking at these lively lobsters, Harriman couldn't help but laugh. He knew that these lobsters were quite delicious. Jiang Hai and the others didn't continue to get on the boat. Instead, they stepped on the water for a while and took a break. After filling the boxes with air, they dived into the water again. They couldn't just catch lobsters once. Although Kevin and the others didn't expect to make money by catching these guys, because they were really too cheap here. But since they came here, they naturally had to bring some home. Jiang Hai naturally prepared a batch of frozen lobsters. In this way, Jiang Hai's lobster catching competition began. While Jiang Hai and the others were playing here, on the other side of the earth, in a not-so-high-end wine restaurant in the imperial capital, a person hurriedly pushed open the door of a private room and walked in. "Hey, everyone, I'm sorry, I'm late, I'll punish myself by drinking 3 cups later." After walking into the private room, the man said with a smile, sat on the only empty seat, poured himself a cup, and drank it in one gulp. "Brother Zhou, you're really slow. The seafood boat you've been waiting for is already a little cold." Seeing the arrival of this person, several people on the opposite side couldn't help laughing and talking. At the same time, there were some complaints in their words. Hearing this, the person named Brother Zhou couldn't help but look at the seafood boat in front of him. A trace of playfulness flashed across his face, then he gently picked up his chopsticks and knocked on the plate in front of him with the most shell-like food. Seafood boat was actually just a name. It used a large pot, a large plate, or a ship-shaped wood, and it was filled with cooked seafood. A seafood boat could be eaten by 3 or 4 people, and the price wasn't expensive. In the capital, it was between 300 yuan and 500 yuan. It was a very popular way of eating recently. Of course, the price was different for different things. Now all the people here are Xiaobai, and their monthly salary is an average of 7,000 or 8,000 yuan. After deducting the rent, water, electricity, internet, and travel expenses to and from work, even if they have a car, they have to refuel it. They don't have much money left in a month. Although they are not particularly stingy, seafood boats are definitely delicious for them. But looking at these dishes, Brother Zhou was very pretentious and didn't move his chopsticks. "Hey, I don't have anything to eat for the time being, you guys eat quickly." Putting down the chopsticks in his hand, Brother Zhou said with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, several people next to him couldn't help but look at him. "What's the situation? Didn't you like to eat it before?" Looking at him, a person who has a good relationship with him asked strangely. "Yeah, but didn't I go to the United States a while ago? These things were almost free there. It was so cheap, so I'm tired of eating it." Hearing his words, Brother Zhou said with a calm face. "Brag, Zhou de Peo, don't talk nonsense." But as soon as his voice fell, a bad friend came to tear down his stage. "Hey! You don't believe me, let me show you the photos." In fact, Brother Zhou had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. He took out his mobile phone arrogantly, then clicked on the photos and showed them to the people next to him. Sure enough, the people in these photos were all Brother Zhou, and in the photos he clicked on, they were naturally all seafood. The big prawns were Arctic prawns, each of them was the size of a palm, and the scallops were full of meat. They were more than a size bigger than the scallops in front of them. The oysters were really free, they were just pushed over there. The most eye-catching thing was the big lobster, and there was more than one. These people were a little stunned. Then look at the small seafood boat. It has to be admitted that sometimes, the boat of friendship capsizes, and the boat of seafood capsizes. Let me tell you, the place I went to is called Winthrop. Have you seen these big prawns? $2 per catty, that's $4 per kilogram. They're all live, so $4 is only about 20 yuan. You can buy 2 catties of them, and they're all wild. The prawn meat is called bouncy, and the prawn brains are called plentiful. If you don't want to, you can go to a restaurant and buy them. There's an Italian restaurant over there. The scallops are just there. You can eat as much as you want for $3. Oysters are even more free. This crab, this cod, this squid, this salmon. They're as cheap as you can get. Look at this sea cucumber, this abalone, heh. Hearing this person's words, many of the foodies present couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Indeed, if this guy wasn't bullshitting, then these seafood were more than half cheaper than in China, at least 2/3 cheaper, or even more. Finally, they saw the big lobsters. Brother Zhou, these big guys are much cheaper than in China, right? Pointing at the largest lobster among them, one of them asked Brother Zhou carefully, but his eyes were full of envy. "This one, it's not bad. This one is the king of lobsters, and this one is only 32 catties. It's not a lot there. Look at this person." Brother Zhou glanced at the lobster on his phone, then pretended to be calm, but in fact, he was overjoyed. This guy's acting was really comfortable. He happened to see Jiang Hai in the photo, so he pointed at him. "This guy is the richest man in Winthrop. He's a Huaxia, and this is my brother. This lobster, 2-headed abalone, and sea cucumber are all produced by him. He has a big manor there, and he raises cows. Such a big lobster, let alone other things, in China, you can't eat it without at least 100,000. But over there, just mention my name and it's $3,000, which is less than $18,000 to $20,000. I'll send it directly to the hotel to cook." Of course, the main purpose was to praise Jiang Hai. Then, Brother Zhou talked about the lobster. When they heard that such a big lobster only cost $20,000, many people were tempted. Of course, for white-collar workers like them, of course, they weren't willing to eat a $20,000 lobster by themselves. But if a few people pooled their money together, it was still not bad. Brother Zhou just said that the lobster was 32 catties. Even if it was only 20 catties without the shell, it wouldn't be a problem for 10 people to eat it. In total, each person would only spend a little more than $1,000. It was too tempting to eat such a big lobster with only a little more than $1,000. At that time, many people were tempted, but there were still a few people who weren't tempted. After all, not everyone was a foodie. There were always some people who didn't like to eat. But when these people saw that in addition to the ingredients, there were many other photos. There were photos of playing at the beach, catching fish in the sea, riding a horse, shooting a gun, and party photos. For a moment, everyone's eyes were attracted by the phone. One topic after another was thrown to Brother Zhou, and Brother Zhou also told them one by one. For example, the clothes he was wearing now were more than 1,000 yuan in China, but they were more than 100 yuan there. When they went to the beach to play, it was all free. When they went to the sea to catch fish, the food they ate on the boat was all free. When they went to ride horses, it was almost as cheap as playing for free. Most importantly, how many men did not like guns? Although there was no shooting range to play with guns there, you could shoot freely in the shooting range. Only bullets cost money. Playing with guns was free. You could play with any gun you wanted, from rifles, pistols, shotguns, to assault rifles, machine guns, and sniper rifles. As long as you could move, you could play with it. At the end of the day, it would cost about $100. It was fun. Looking at these photos, Brother Zhou instantly became the focus of these people. Originally, they were looking forward to and wanted to eat the seafood boat, but at this time, they were left out, especially after these people asked about the price. Including accommodation, round-trip tickets, and travel expenses, it was only 8,000 per person. It was really cheap. Chapter 500. While Brother Zhou was being pretentious, many people in the capital were being pretentious as well. There were only 3 places that had planes from China to the United States: the capital, Shanghai, and Yuezhou. This group of tourists was actually from the capital, so the people they pretended to be pretentious were all from around the capital. Many people wanted to go and take a look after sensing that these people's 13 slots were full. The world was so big, they had to go and have a look. Not long after the first group of tourists came back. Many people came to the travel agency, intending to take a look before signing up for a trip to Winthrop. Some of these people were going for the first time, and some had already booked a place for the second time. Originally, this travel agency planned to prepare for a week after returning, and then finalize the itinerary in another week. That is, they would go after half a month. However, just a few days after returning, when Zhang Hai was still traveling along the United States waters, the travel agency's phone almost exploded with calls. A large group of people also came to their original location. These people came to ask and even asked to go to Winthrop, which made the person in charge of the travel agency a little confused. By the time he came back to his senses, he had already organized a second group to head to Winthrop's. Naturally, Wuxian and the others were still leading the group. From the time they got off the plane to the second group's departure, it only took 5 days. That is to say, before Zhang Hai arrived in Miami, the second group had already arrived. This time, the number of people was 86. Winthrop was already experienced, so they immediately arranged a car to pick them up. And after these people arrived, their friends' circle of friends naturally went into an uproar. Zhang Hai's manor was still the focus of these people's attention. Many people came here to eat the seafood in Zhang Hai's manor. Edward Anderson and the others also got authorization from Zhang Hai before Zhang Hai left, so they could also sell the seafood. However, everything must be accounted for. Zhang Hai can allow them to eat as much as they want, but he can't allow these people to sell the seafood in his manor and stuff the money into their pockets. This was a matter of principle, not a matter of money. Fortunately, Edward Anderson and the others knew this very well. Moreover, Zhang Hai had already told them that they would get a 20% share of the seafood sold. A lobster was $3,000, and they could get $600. What else could be more tempting than this? So naturally, Winthrop's reputation and influence in China exploded again. The second group of tourists hasn't returned yet, but the third group of 102 people came. This time, Jiang Hai's villas can no longer be lived in. The people who opened the hotels also started to make money. Although it was impossible to charge more than Jiang Hai's seaside villa, or even half the price, for them, it was just a matter of getting something for nothing. It was really profitable. Unknowingly, Winthrop became the best choice for many people who came to the United States to play. It was 13 square meters high, had delicious food, and was very cheap. The scenery was picturesque, and there were many things to play. For people in China, Winthrop had a lot of charm. At the same time, because of these people's publicity, many people who studied in Boston also knew about Winthrop. They really didn't know that there was such a fun place near them, so there were the first group of people who drove to Winthrop. For a time, Winthrop was not only popular in China, but also in the United States. When Jiang Hai started to dive and catch lobsters in Puerto Rico, the fourth group of tourists went abroad. The fourth domestic tour group had already set off. There were 124 people in this group. In less than a month, Winthrop had received about 400 Wuxia people, and dozens of Americans had also gone to visit them. Although the visitor flow was not very high, it was a heavy blow to the Boston Tourism Bureau. They were beaten until they were stunned for a moment. What was going on? Originally, Winthrop was not a very attractive place in their eyes. In other words, it was not a good tourist attraction. At the same time, they decided not to develop Winthrop to give face to their colleagues. Of course, Jiang Hai and Mayor Wallace bypassed the Boston Tourism Bureau to modify Winthrop themselves. This was also one of the reasons why they were unhappy with Winthrop. But now, what is going on? How can Winthrop accept 400 Wuxia tourists in a month? Of course, 400 people was not a lot, but that was only the people in one tour group. If there were 10 people, that would be 4,000 people. Even if Winthrop only had half a year to play, 10 tour groups would still be able to accommodate more than 20,000 people. If a tourist spent $1,000 here, it would be more than $20 million. Just thinking about it made their kidneys hurt. American politics did not allow them to have a subordinate relationship. In other words, the American government could not control the state government, and the state government could not control the municipal government. Winthrop was not under the jurisdiction of the Boston Tourism Bureau. Even if it was, it had nothing to do with the Boston Tourism Bureau. It was the only place where they could make money. This was the problem with the tour groups. But the problem was that they did not promote them. In other words, these tour groups were found by Jiang Hai and had nothing to do with the Boston Tourism Bureau. As mentioned earlier, every level of government was not subordinate to the Boston Tourism Bureau. Even if they paid taxes, the national tax was paid to the American government, and the state tax was paid to the Massachusetts government. It had nothing to do with the Boston Tourism Bureau. The rest of the money belonged to the town hall. Seeing that Winthrop was popular, the Boston Tourism Bureau officials were stunned. After discussing it for a few days, they felt reluctant to give up on this big cake. So, they took the initiative to discuss with Mayor Wallace if they could invest more in Winthrop and promote it. Then, they could get a share of the pie. But Mayor Wallace did not care at all. In the beginning, he was also very worried about these Wuxia tourists. He was afraid that they would not be willing to spend money here and that they would not want to come. After all, Wuxia did not have a beach. Why did they have to come here? But when the number of tourists came up, he knew that Jiang Hai was right. He just had to do what Jiang Hai said. What Boston government? Who cares about them? Therefore, the people they sent were ruthlessly rejected. Only Jiang Hai did not know about this. If Jiang Hai knew, he would probably open a bottle of red wine to celebrate. For the time being, they did not care about Winthrop. Jiang Hai and the others had already caught a lot of lobsters in the sea. After catching enough to eat, Jiang Hai and the others stopped catching and began to play by the sea. On such a hot day, it was very comfortable to soak in the sea. After swimming for half a day, Jiang Hai and the others were also a little hungry. They swam back to the boat and made a dish of baked lobsters because they caught too many lobsters. Because the Caribbean lobsters here grew everywhere throughout the year, their sizes were really not small. The food that they picked wasn't small. But even so, the smallest one weighed about 6 jeans, while the big ones weighed about 13 or 4 jeans. These big ones were caught by Jiang Hai and the others. Delina and the others couldn't swim underwater with these guys. 13 or 14 kilograms of lobsters were directly chopped off with a knife. If people in China saw this, they would probably be scolded to death. One must know that lobsters also have a lobster brain. Most importantly, although the spiky dragon didn't have pincers like the Boston lobster, it still had a lot of meat inside its barbed tentacles. This meat was worth a lot of money in the country. But here, no one cared about this. The heads of the lobsters were directly thrown into the sea. Naturally, there would be fish to eliminate them. As for the tail of the lobster, it was cut from the middle, then a thick layer of cheese was placed on it and placed in the oven to bake. After taking it out and eating it, the taste was quite irresistible. Even Kevin and the others ate it with a happy face. There was no other way. Although there was no shortage of lobsters in Puerto Rico and they could eat it whenever they wanted, the cheese here was very expensive. Basically, the cheese that could be bought here was made in the United States. The cheese on Jiang Hai's ship was bought from Zhang Dihai's Shanghai supermarket. None of them were made in the United States, they were all original goods from Europe. Everyone knew that cheese was naturally better in Europe. In the past, Jiang Hai did not have many opportunities to eat cheese in China, but he liked to eat pizza. After arriving in the United States, naturally, he would eat all kinds of cheese. It was only after he arrived here that he realized that cheese wasn't something that could be casually used. For example, cheese was used on pizza, salad, or bread. They were all different. In summary, the most famous cheese in the world, for example, the French's favorite cheese was Byron cheese, followed by Bosworth cheese. This cheese was made from goat's milk, so it was not as sour as yogurt. It had a soft taste and was quite good. Next was cheddar cheese, which was made in the United Kingdom. It could be eaten directly as a seasoning, and it tasted very good. Next was red county cheese, which tasted a little sour and a little salty. To be honest, the taste was a little strange. There was also Carmanta cheese, which was the cheese in Tom and Jerry's. The pits on it were due to fermentation. It was very hard, but it had a strong fruity taste. It tasted very good. Those who liked it would like it very much. Those who did not like it would not like it. Next was mozzarella cheese. Anyone who ate pizza knew this kind of cheese. This kind of cheese was the special cheese for pizza. Pizza made with other kinds of cheese was not pizza. This kind of cheese had to be eaten with pizza. In addition, there was Stilton cheese, Red Lister cheese, Vensler cheese, and so on. Jiang Hai had everything here. Chapter 501. Hello, boss, when are you coming back? The grapes in the vineyard are almost ripe. Listening to Aphrodite's voice on the other side of the phone, Jiang Hai's heart couldn't help but soften. In fact, the relationship between him and Aphrodite, it's a mess. But this is just talk. If you really want him and Aphrodite to confirm something, he can't be sure. It should be soon, that is, we will be returning in the next few days. After shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Aphrodite on the other side of the phone after shaking his head to get rid of the unrealistic thoughts in his mind. After giving a rough date, he hung up the phone. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai has now left the Winthrop Manor for more than half a month. He spent 7 days circling the east coast of the United States, then stayed for a day in Miami, then came to Puerto Rico. After resting for a day, he went tuna fishing on the first day, lobster on the second day, and tuna fishing on the third day, but changed his position. On the fourth day, because he was a little bored playing at sea, he went to San Juan to officially say goodbye to Kevin and the others. In fact, The reason why Jiang Hai came here was mainly because he had found the location of the 3 sunken ships nearby. But unfortunately, these sunken ships were not as good as the previous one, and there were no rare treasures in these sunken ships. Moreover, most of the things were still gold coins and silver coins, and even gems were very few. If the first ship is worth 200 million, then the next 2 ships are only worth about 300 million. Together, the 3 ships are worth 500 million. This is still 500 million short of the gap in Jiang Hai's heart. Now it seems that if Jiang Hai's goal is only tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions, then fishing for the treasures on these sunken ships is still very good, but if the gap is so big, fishing for the treasures on the sunken ships is a bit unrealistic. After all, not all sunken ships have a Spanish golden armor on them, right? So after finding the 3 ships, Jiang Hai went around to the Caribbean Sea to look for other ships there. After arriving in San Juan on the 4th day, he still played around in the city. At night, he sailed away from the port and went to a place about 170 nautical miles away from San Juan. According to the mark on the sea map, there is a sunken ship here. After Jiang Hai went to the sea, he found that this sunken ship is a bit interesting, because although there are still gold coins and gems on the ship, they are piled up in 3 rooms. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, the things on this ship are worth 400 million. In this way, his money should be almost complete. The 500 million yuan from before, plus the 400 million yuan here, should be enough. Since the location has been determined, Jiang Hai didn't hold back. The next day, they were still in San Juan, but at night, Jiang Hai quietly went there and skillfully brought the treasures up. This time, except for Belle Lester, the other 4 people helped. Halaman's mind was simple, and since Jiang Hai told him not to say anything, he wouldn't say anything. Jiang Hai trusted Azalina very much, and as for Delina and Marian, there were very few people in the manor who knew Jiang Hai's secret. Jiang Hai didn't hide anything from them. Of course, he didn't say that he didn't trust Belle, so he let Belle go to San Juan for fun. According to him, this was to let Belle relax, and Belle wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. When the ship sailed back the next day, Jiang Hai's bottommost cabin was already filled with gold coins and gems. The next day, which was the 6th day since Jiang Hai came to the Caribbean Sea, he returned to the dock where he first landed. Then at night, he went to the 3rd sunken ship to get the things on it. Then on the 7th day, he got the treasures from the lobster. According to his estimation, he should go and get the last ship tomorrow, which was the first ship that Jiang Hai found. After getting the ship, Jiang Hai would return to Miami. Moses Adams had already contacted the people in Phillips. These people were quite satisfied with Jiang Hai's arrival, because they knew that as long as Jiang Hai came, he would bring them great wealth. Naturally, they didn't dare to say much, and had prepared enough security forces. After everything was done, Jiang Hai stayed at the dock for another day. After buying a lot of souvenirs, he sailed back to the first place when night fell. This time, Belle was also on the ship, and this was the only time he was on a ship. However, Jiang Hai didn't let him out of the house. Although Belle felt that Jiang Hai was treating him differently, he didn't care. Because he knew that sometimes, the more he knew, the easier it was for something to happen. It was better for him to know less. After everything was arranged, Jiang Hai put on his equipment, carried a large bottle of oxygen and a lot of bags, and dived into the deep sea. This time, he was really familiar with the place. After all, he had just been here not long ago. In less than half an hour, he had already seen the ship. After getting on the ship, he walked towards the 2nd floor, but when he came to the 2nd floor, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. This was because he clearly remembered that when he first came here, there were a lot of small fishes on the 2nd floor. But at this time, these fishes had disappeared, not even insects could be seen. This made Jiang Hai's brows wrinkle. What's going on? He muttered in a low voice. Since Jiang Hai had the dragon balls, he was very sensitive to these kinds of dangers. He threw a fluorescent rod down, and after waiting for a long time, there was no movement. Jiang Hai slowly walked towards the 2nd floor, but when he reached the 2nd floor, there were indeed no fish nearby, no fish at all. In addition to the fish, there were no other animals. The only things that grew here were the seaweeds and moss. As Jiang Hai entered the water, the seaweeds were constantly swaying, setting off an unusual atmosphere. Huh. I saw a ghost. Although there was nothing on the second floor, Jiang Hai felt that his heart was constantly thumping. He knew that this was a feeling of nervousness and fear, but except for the first time in the water, he hadn't felt like this for a long time. He felt as if there was something terrible waiting for him at the end of the corridor. This made him a little depressed. He was a materialist. He didn't believe in ghosts or gods at all. Although there was no way to explain the dragon balls on his body, and there was no way to explain the dragon skeleton that he found at the beginning. But he believed that even if there were ghosts or gods in this world, he was the only one. There was nothing supernatural in this world, and he was not afraid of the creatures in the natural environment. Moreover, this place was only so small, and the corridor was only 2 meters wide. What kind of monster could there be here? Sharks. It's not like he hasn't killed them before. Not to mention ordinary sharks, he even killed a group of hammerhead sharks. Now, even if there was a great white shark, he was not afraid. What's more, if it was really a large shark, it would be strange if it could move here. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai's mood also became relaxed. I'm not afraid. Patting his cheeks, Jiang Hai walked forward again, but he had already taken the spear in his hand. He walked to the end of the second floor, but there was nothing here. This made Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at the third floor. It seems that the feeling of danger came from the third floor. Sure enough, when Jiang Hai's head looked at the bottom of the third floor, he was surprised to find that the skeletons that were originally under the bottom of the ship had all disappeared, not a single bone was left. Seeing this, Jiang Hai instantly felt a chill running from his back to his scalp. The 36,000 pores on his body opened in an instant, and the cold juice was squeezed out of his forehead. But he was now in the water, and as soon as the juice appeared, it was taken away by the water. This made Jiang Hai also forced himself to calm down. Picking up a fluorescent stick, Jiang Hai threw it into the third floor. But after waiting for more than 10 minutes, there was no movement on the third floor. This made Jiang Hai puzzled, but also a little relieved. It seems that even if the skeletons suddenly came back to life, they shouldn't be on the third floor. Maintaining a very fast heartbeat, Jiang Hai slowly touched the third floor, but looking at it, the third floor was still the same as before. This made him feel a little strange, but now wasn't the time to explore what happened here. Jiang Hai quickly went to the 2 warehouses and threw a fluorescent stick inside. After confirming that there was nothing inside, Jiang Hai went into one of the warehouses and began to put things inside. The warehouse was quickly filled up. Then he went to the plate armor and put these things on it. Then he went to the third floor and continued to put the treasures in the room. Nothing happened while he was putting them, which made Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel that he was thinking too much. The treasures in this room were almost the same as those in the previous room. Jiang Hai had more than a dozen large bags of treasures. Therefore, he was able to sweep the room clean. In the end, under Jiang Hai's sweeping, all the treasures in the room were swept clean. But just as he was about to carry the treasures, suddenly, a black shadow slowly passed through the door of the treasure room and appeared behind Jiang Hai. Then this black shadow slowly rose. When it rose to about 3 meters high, it suddenly whipped at the back of Jiang Hai's head like a stick. At this critical moment, Jiang Hai's super perception played a key role at this time. He instantly pulled up a bag of treasures beside him and threw it behind him. With a muffled bang, the bag of treasures was scattered by the strange thing. Jiang Hai got an opportunity and turned his head. When his headlamp shone on the black shadow, Jiang Hai couldn't help but take a deep breath. At the same time, another black shadow slowly rose behind him. Chapter 502. F***CK, is it an octopus? Or a squid? Looking at the monster in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think. He saw that the monster in front of him wasn't actually a whole body, but a single tentacle. But even this tentacle was 3 meters long, and the whole tentacle was as thick as the largest baseball bat. The most important thing was that this tentacle was covered with fist-sized suction cups, and in each suction cup, there was a sharp claw with barbs like fangs. After being hit by the treasure that Jiang Hai threw out, this tentacle instantly entangled the bag of treasure and directly tore it into pieces. The net made of pure metal was as weak as a plastic bag under its strength. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai knew that the fear in the depths of his heart should come from this monster. Looking at this monster with a 3-meter-long tentacle in front of him, who knows how big this monster is? So Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to fight it head-on, but wanted to sneak away quietly. But just as Jiang Hai was about to leave the room, suddenly a stream of water came from behind him. He didn't have time to look back and instantly fell forward, dodging the attack behind him. When he looked back, another tentacle had already unknowingly drilled out from a hole on the other side of the room, almost wrapping him up. And just as Jiang Hai fell to the ground, the original tentacle seemed to know that Jiang Hai was lying there. In an instant, it rolled over again. Looking at the 2 tentacles in front of him, Jiang Hai instantly pulled out his 2 harpoons. At the most critical moment, the 2 harpoons were also launched. Only to hear 2 clanging sounds, the harpoons carried the 2 large tentacles directly into the room. At this moment, the whole ship shook. But Jiang Hai didn't care so much at this time. He didn't want the treasure anymore. He bent his back and ran out of the door. But as soon as he went out, he saw countless tentacles rushing in from the entrance of the 3rd and 4th floor. Looking at the tentacles rushing towards him, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure to chat there. He immediately swam forward at the fastest speed. Yes, he has already started swimming, not walking. In the blink of an eye, he had already reached the entrance of the 3rd floor. After going up to the 2nd floor, he didn't run to the 1st floor, because at this time, those tentacles saw that there was no way to catch up with Jiang Hai directly. They had already changed their direction. Whether it's an octopus or a squid, they are all very stupid. But sometimes, a stupid method is more powerful than a smart one. For example, now that it knows that it can't catch up with Jiang Hai, it might as well directly destroy the ship. So when Jiang Hai arrived at the 2nd floor, 3 tentacles forcibly broke the rotten wood of the 2nd floor and blocked in front of Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai's original plan couldn't be carried out, but this didn't mean that he would be captured without a fight. He had already seen the situation here when he came in. How could he give this guy such a chance? In an instant, Jiang Hai swam into a sailor's room next to him. Without saying anything, he directly kicked the wall of the sailor's room. With a loud bang, the wall of the sailor's room was shattered by Jiang Hai's kick, and he instantly swam out of the sailor's room. Feeling that the prey had swam away, the monster in the sailor's room couldn't help but become angry. It began to shake violently. How could this 300-year-old shipwreck withstand the shaking of this monster? After shaking a few times, Jiang Hai only heard a loud crack. The shipwreck had been directly shaken into pieces by this monster. In the muddy wood fragments and sand, a giant monster slowly appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Squid, giant spear squid. Looking at the emergence of the giant beast, Jiang Hai couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He felt a bit of pain in his throat. He could feel that he was really in trouble this time. Giant spear squid, scientific name king sour squid, was the world's largest mollusk and the most famous deep-sea monster. It was mainly distributed in the Antarctic continent, but after all, this thing was alive, so it would sometimes wander around. South America, South Africa, and even New Zealand had traces of it. This monster could grow up to more than 20 meters long. Obviously, in the past, Jiang Hai had never thought that this was a serious matter. This was because he had encountered king sour squid when he was diving. The largest one was about 5 or 6 meters long. He had even solved one before, but now he believed in it. Because at this time, in front of him was definitely a grandfather's king sour squid. Its whole body was dark red, as if it had been smeared with blood. Its whole body was at least 23 meters tall. King sour squid was born quickly, but it also died quickly. An average king sour squid only had a lifespan of 450 days, but Jiang Hai felt that at that time, this guy would definitely have lived for more than just a year. Otherwise, with this guy's small brain, how could he think of tactics? This was all hunting experience. As this giant monster broke free from the pirate ship, this guy's big shining eyes also stared at Jiang Hai. Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai's first thought was to run, but the problem was, could he run? His maximum speed was 10 nautical miles per hour. At this speed, he could still run when facing ordinary sharks and the like. But facing this guy, he really had no confidence, but now even if he had no confidence, he had to try. Jiang Hai took a deep breath and looked at the giant monster slowly swimming out of the sand. His body flashed, and in an instant, he rushed towards the sea surface. But just as Jiang Hai thought, this guy was not going to let go of Jiang Hai, this delicious snack. As this king sour squid spat out a stream of water, it flew out from its original place like a torpedo in an instant. It did not give Jiang Hai a chance to think at all. When Jiang Hai turned his head, he had already seen its big eyes upside down moving forward. Seeing this, Jiang Hai did not say anything and immediately turned around. At the same time, he reloaded his spear and shot it at its eyes. However, the king sour squid's protection of its eyes was extremely strong. In an instant, it swung its wrist and used one of its tentacles to block Jiang Hai's spear. Although the tentacle was pierced, it was only limited to that. At the same time, its remaining tentacles were like blooming chrysanthemums, wrapping around Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at the incoming tentacles and the faintly visible giant mouth in front of him. His original self-confidence was shattered at this time. He originally thought that after reaching level 3, he could go anywhere in this sea area. Now it seemed that he was too naive, really too naive. Looking at the giant mouth in front of him, Jiang Hai shot another spear, but it was blocked by the tentacles again. Jiang Hai pulled out the gunpowder weapon that he originally carried, the underwater pistol, at this time. However, although the bullets could injure this guy, they were not fatal at all. Squid were mollusks. Even if they were cut into pieces, they would still live for a while. Therefore, if one wanted to kill it, there was only one way, and it had only one weakness. One was to exhaust it, like a sperm whale, and the other was to directly hit its otolith. However, this guy was more than 20 meters long, and its otolith was only the size of a pinky fingernail. How could one hit it? Therefore, Jiang Hai fired all the bullets underwater, but it was only a stalemate for a moment. In the next second, a tentacle instantly wrapped around Jiang Hai's waist and sent him into this guy's mouth. Feeling the sharp claws on the tentacle scratching him painfully, Jiang Hai could not help but think sorrowfully. Could it be that this book ends here? Looking at the giant mouth that was getting closer and closer to him, a thought flashed in Jiang Hai's mind. However, as soon as this thought flashed, he suppressed it. What a joke. The female lead had not been decided yet. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai instantly took off his gloves. His right hand instantly pressed on the slippery tentacle wrapped around him. Then, the thin spirit energy instantly entered the body of this giant spear squid. As the spirit energy entered, the giant spear squid that originally wanted to eat Jiang Hai could not help but be stunned. A pair of big fluorescent eyes stared at Jiang Hai. Just like this, after Jiang Hai and this big guy looked at each other for 5 minutes, the big guy's eyes suddenly changed. Jiang Hai felt that it seemed to be smiling at him because the appearance of its eyes changed. Then, the big guy's tentacles slowly moved Jiang Hai from its mouth to its eyes. After deliberately rubbing its face against Jiang Hai, it slowly let go of its tentacle. It's working. Escaping from death, truly escaping from death. Looking at the appearance of the giant spear squid, Jiang Hai let out a long breath. He really did not think that he could actually escape with his life like this. It seemed that modern equipment was useful, but when it encountered a giant beast, it was useless. The most useful thing was still his own spirit energy. This was the best thing to play with. Taking a deep breath, Jiang Hai put his hand on the head of this giant spear squid again. This time, he directly used 2 pieces of spirit energy and injected it into the body of this giant spear squid. In total, he used 3 pieces of spirit energy, and these 3 pieces of spirit energy were equivalent to 9 pieces of spirit energy in the dragon stage. This spirit energy was enough to benefit this giant spear squid a lot. Looking at this cheerful squid, Jiang Hai could not help but touch his chin. It seemed that he had the most powerful bodyguard. After playing with this guy for a while, Jiang Hai went back to the broken sailboat and picked up the bags again. But this time, he did not have to carry them. The giant spear squid had become Jiang Hai's little brother. After taking the initiative to take the bags, it floated to the surface with Jiang Hai. After telling the giant spear squid to lie under the bottom of his boat, Jiang Hai carried these bags back to the boat. As soon as he got on the boat, Jiang Hai let out a long breath. Tonight was too exciting. Chapter 503. Mr. Jiang, we have appraised this batch of jewelry. The total market value is about $900 million. We still need to calculate the specific price. Are you going to sell it or let us auction it? Sitting in the VIP lounge of Philip's auction house in Miami, the Arabian who had a relationship with Jiang Hai asked Jiang Hai with a smile. His flattering look was quite nasty. I'll sell it to you directly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai muttered in his heart. He still has 800 million yuan, but 600 million yuan will be taxed next year. He still has 200 million yuan left. Including 900 million yuan, that would be 1 billion yuan. He can spend 1 billion yuan to buy 1 billion yuan of oil futures, and then he can use the remaining 100 million yuan as his usual mobile cash. Well, I'll do it. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the salesman also smiled and went to the side to make a phone call. Looking at him, Jiang Hai also leaned his head back on the sofa and began to close his eyes to rest. Moses Adams, who was beside him, was also sitting there calmly, waiting for the contract to be signed in a while. Jiang Hai was really tired right now. Of course, he wasn't referring to his body being tired. With his physical fitness that was 4 times the limit of a human, it wasn't easy to tire him out. The tiredness he was talking about was the mental tiredness. It couldn't be helped. After all, no one would feel relaxed after experiencing the fierce battle last night. However, the only good thing was that this guy had now become Jiang Hai's bodyguard. Thinking about it, if Jiang Hai wanted to salvage shipwrecks in the future, with such a big bodyguard, it would be much easier for him. Except for the giant sperm whale, this guy was definitely the strongest existence in the sea. With such a strong bodyguard, Jiang Hai could escape into the water if he could not beat others. The water was his world. After dealing with the big squid last night, Jiang Hai let it attach to his ship and set a target. After returning to Miami, he first put the things into his room, then called Azalina, Delina, and Marian. After classifying and counting the treasures, he took the other hidden treasures into his room alone. After a night of sailing, they had arrived in Miami early the next morning. Moses Adams had already talked to Phillips and came to the dock to pick up Jiang Hai and the goods. Only Jiang Hai got off the ship. The others stayed on the ship, but Belle, Harriman, and Azalina each received $1 million. Needless to say, they knew what the money was for. It was hush money, or a fee for their hard work. This was why Belle was willing to know nothing. While these people were resting on the ship, Jiang Hai went to Phillips's auction house with Moses Adams. After nearly a day of counting, they soon gave Jiang Hai a number that he had in mind. Since it was not the first time they had worked together, Moses Adams would keep an eye on it. The rest had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Despicable Mother AI, Eagle honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, honored honored, Despicable Mother AI. While Jiang Hai was resting with his eyes closed, his phone rang. It was a song by an American rock band called Maroon 5. It was a new song released last year. The name was Beast, a Gwinnett. Of course, this song was not what Jiang Hai liked. It was because Kevin and the others liked it. Children at this age liked rock music the most. After hanging out with them for a few days, Delina and Marian also started to like this song. Therefore, regardless of whether Jiang Hai was willing or not, they changed Jiang Hai's mobile phone's ringtone to this song. Jiang Hai usually didn't change his mobile phone's ringtone, it was always them who changed it. Sometimes, when the music played, Jiang Hai didn't even know that it was his mobile phone that was ringing. When the song rang, Jiang Hai was startled. He picked up the phone and looked at the name on it. Jiang Hai was a little surprised. "Hello, Du Feimin, why are you calling me?" After glancing at the name on the phone, Jiang Hai thought for a moment before answering the call. Yes, the person who called was none other than Du Feimin. "Hey, bro, I'm very sad to hear you say that. In my opinion, we are friends." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin laughed and said. Hearing his hearty laughter, Jiang Hai chuckled. Is this guy my friend? Perhaps, but Jiang Hai did not think that there was any real friendship between them. Well, bro, why did you call me? It can't be just to exchange pleasantries, right? Hearing Du Feimin's voice, Jiang Hai laughed and said. If he really called just to exchange pleasantries, then he did not care. I just want to ask about you. Of course, I also have some small matters to discuss with you. I heard that you recently got a batch of treasures. Oh, my God, I'm a little envious of you. You're the illegitimate son of God. The goddess of luck must have an affair with you. Hearing Jiang Hai's laughter, Du Feimin also laughed and said. Well, am I the illegitimate son of God? I don't think so, because I'm a pure Wuxia. As for the goddess of luck you mentioned, if she is really a beauty, I don't mind having an affair with her. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Jiang Hai chuckled. In fact, he had already guessed that Du Feimin would definitely know about him selling his treasures in Philips. I'm calling to tell you that your batch of jewelry has been intercepted by me. I think I need these things more than Philips. As for the money I'll give you, I may not have 900 million in cash, but I can take out 1 billion in oil futures. I wonder if you're interested? I remember you once said that you wanted to buy some more, so I'll buy it with these. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin also laughed, and then said seriously, 1 billion in oil futures? Are you sure? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai could not help but frown. Originally, he wanted to buy these things, but this guy actually took the initiative to send these treasures to Jiang Hai. This made Jiang Hai a little confused, because he never believed in the saying of a pie falling from the sky, because the pie was very likely to be a trap. Even if Jiang Hai's batch of jewelry was sold separately, it would probably not be sold for 1 billion. After all, there was not much room for gold and silver coins, and there was a large quantity of them, so these things basically had a price. Under such circumstances, Du Feimin was actually willing to take out 1 billion in oil futures? Jiang Hai felt a little incredulous. After all, there was no oil in 10 years that did not have a beneficial price. His 1 billion in oil futures would at least have a beneficial price of 20% to 30%, which was 2 billion to 3 billion. He did not believe that someone would give him $4 for no reason. So as soon as Du Feimin's voice fell, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. Hey, brother, that thing is very valuable in your eyes, but in fact, in our eyes, it's not very valuable, at least not as valuable as Nahi, right? Listening to Jiang Hai's doubts on the other side of the phone, Du Feimin said with a smile. If this is your final answer, then I'm very happy to sell it, but are you sure there are no additional terms? Hearing him say this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, and asked Du Feimin on the other side of the phone with some confusion. Of course, that's that. If there's something, I'll look for you directly. This is not a prerequisite for the deal between us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin said directly. If that's what you said, of course I'm willing. I'm in Miami now, when can you come over? It would be a waste not to take advantage of the situation. Jiang Hai had already made it very clear that he said there were no additional conditions, so Jiang Hai didn't care. I'm still in Dubai. You know, I'm discussing the oil transfer with people in your country. I can't go to the United States now, but my lawyer is there. He has full authority to discuss this deal with you. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was amused. It seems that this guy really doesn't care about 1 billion in oil futures. He just sent a lawyer over. It's $1 billion, not 1 billion Korean won or 1 billion Vietnamese dong. This money is not a small amount, even for these rich people, at least for Jiang Hai. This is 1/3 of his net worth, but it seems that he really doesn't care. It doesn't matter, but I still think it's better to talk to you in person. Shrugging, Jiang Hai said to the other side of the phone. That's true. After all, I don't trust others to manage 1 billion yuan. How about this? Didn't I say that I was going to visit you? On August 24th, I'll be going to Atlantic City in the United States to watch a UFC fight. When that time comes, I'll drop by your place. If you have time, you can come over and sign the contract with me. As for this batch of jewelry, you can store it in Philips for now. Don't worry, it's free. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin on the other side of the phone thought for a moment and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. It was already August 15th, August 24th, there were only a few days left. After he sent these people home, he would personally make a trip to Atlantic City. The last time he went, it was because of Pra Walton, but the two inexplicably had a relationship. To be honest, Jiang Hai actually wanted to avoid her, but to be honest, he was still quite interested in Atlantic City. After all, it was the second largest gambling city in the United States, and he had never been there in his life. It was good to go once in a while. And most importantly, he was going there to discuss a deal worth more than 1 billion. Chapter 504. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. The morning sun shone on the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. A large fishing boat was slowly moving through Sandy Bay with a boat full of tourists. A large trawler was also working behind their boat. The tourists had never seen such a boat before. One or two of them leaned against the side of the boat, watching the waves that the boat stirred up or the small fish that jumped out of the water from time to time. Of course, more people were keen to take photos there and post them on their WeChat moments when they returned to the hotel. A Wuxia SIM card could not be used in the United States, unless you had an international call card. Only then would you be able to make calls and surf the internet in the United States. However, not many people knew how to make calls and surf the internet. Many people from Winthrop were living a good life that they could never have imagined before. For example, the fishermen who drove fishing boats. For example, the people who opened horse farms and hotels were all earning a lot of money. In less than a month, they had earned more than what they had earned in an entire season. Although it was tuna fishing season, many Winthrop fishermen did not go to Cape Cod to participate in the annual feast. In their opinion, they would be working there day and night for 2 months, and it would be extremely hard. It would be good if they could earn $100,000 from a single boat. If they wanted to hire someone, they would have to pay at least $20,000. The remaining $80,000, after paying 35% of the national tax and state taxes, would be around $40,000 to $50,000. Indeed, this amount of money would be equivalent to their annual income, but they did not need to suffer this time. They could earn money by staying at home. Why would they go there and suffer? Just like now, they could go to Winthrop every morning to get people. After that, they would go around Sandy Bay and catch 2 nets of fish. One person had to pay $20 to play on the boat, which was the latest price. 10 people would be $200. Besides, there were more than 10 people on the boat every day. There were more than 30 people on the boat right now, which added up to more than $600. They could eat the fish, prawns, crabs, and lobsters that they caught. How much could one person eat? 3 kilograms? 4 kilograms? 5 kilograms. Moreover, there were old people and children on the boat. If each person was 3 kilograms, 30 people would be about 100 kilograms. With one net, they could easily catch 200 to 300 kilograms of fish. With 2 nets, they could catch at least 500 kilograms, which was 1,000 kilograms. These people would also buy the fish at a discount of 10% from the market price, which consumed another 100 kilograms. He could easily earn more than $2,000 a day by selling the rest of the goods to fishing companies. That would be $60,000 in a year and $120,000 in 2 months. Not to mention that this was a business that could last him for half a year. Even if he just lay down at home in the winter, he would still make $360,000 a month. After paying taxes, he would have at least $200,000 left. After deducting the $50,000 for gas, he would still have $150,000 left. What? Wear and tear on the boat. How much did a new boat cost? Besides, there were no strong winds or big waves in the inner bay. There was no fear of conflict, so how could there be any wear and tear? Most importantly, they didn't need to look for helpers at all. One family was enough. This way, they could save more than $100,000 a year. For fishermen, they didn't need bicycles at all. Moreover, in the winter, they could go fishing in the ocean to earn some income. Just thinking about it made them feel good. They had only heard that the tourists in Wuxia were not short of money and were very generous, but they didn't expect them to be so rich. Of course, they also knew who attracted these tourists, so Jiang Hai's reputation in Winthrop was very high. If Jiang Hai said that he wanted to be the mayor and asked the townspeople to vote for him, no matter who the other party was, he would probably get a landslide victory. "Mr. Captain, are we in the Atlantic Ocean now?" Just as the captain was enjoying himself, a man stood up and asked. Hearing his question, the captain slowly explained. "What do you think?" Hearing his question, the captain slowly explained. He knew that there were specialized translators in this team, and many of them could speak English. However, some of them couldn't speak very well. As long as he spoke slowly, most of these people could understand. "We are now in the Atlantic Ocean, but not too far from the shore. This place is also called Sandy Bay." Then the captain explained what Sandy Bay was. The so-called Sandy Bay didn't just refer to a bay. There were many bays with the same name. Of course, this was not because of the same name, but because many bays were indeed called Sandy Bay. The original meaning of Sandy Bay was Sandy Bay. The so-called Sandy Bay was also called Sandy Bay, which was a bay near the continental shelf. However, the water here was generally not deep, and below it was sand. There were no reefs or corals. It was suitable for playing and catching fish, but not suitable for a harbor or diving. There were many sandy bays not only in the United States, but also in China. In Jiang Hai's fishing ground, in addition to the corals, the sandy bay where Edward Anderson took Jiang Hai and the others to catch fish was his sandy bay. However, at this time, Jiang Hai's sandy bay had become a seaweed forest, which was also the favorite place for his fish to play. Of course, the place where they were now was not Jiang Hai's sandy bay, but a private place. "Wow, look, what is that?" Just as the captain was explaining the composition of the sandy bay, a tourist suddenly exclaimed. Hearing his exclamation, the captain couldn't help but look back, which made him frown. Although there was still a lot of fog on the sea at this time, he could see that it should be a ship, and it's not slow. If it was just a ship, then he wouldn't care, but the problem is that this ship is moving very fast, and it's coming towards him. He is not afraid of hitting his ship, but if it scares away his fish, then it will be troublesome. Fortunately, when he saw the other party also saw him and slowly slowed down. As the ship broke through the fog, the captain also saw the appearance of the incoming ship. When he saw the metallic and cool ship, he couldn't help but laugh, and the tourists over there began to shout and take photos. What a joke! Although many of them haven't been on a yacht before, it doesn't mean that they haven't seen it before. A yacht, a real yacht, and it's so handsome, how can they not be surprised? "Hey, Jiang, welcome back." Seeing that the two ships were about to pass by each other, the captain here grabbed the radio in his captain's room and shouted at the other ship. Not long after, his radio also rang. "Ha, thank you, it's really tiring to play this round, how's your harvest?" Listening to the slightly familiar but strange voice on the other side of the radio, the captain knew that it was Jiang Hai's voice. He and Jiang Hai didn't know each other, or it can be said that he knows Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai doesn't know him, but now Jiang Hai can reply, which makes him very happy. Not bad, thank you for introducing the tourists. Hearing the words on the radio, the bearded captain continued. Then treat them well and let them know that our Winthrop is a good place. Hearing the captain's words, Jiang Hai also said something, then hung up the radio and accelerated towards Winthrop. Captain, do you know the owner of that ship? Seeing the ship leave quickly, the crowd reacted. A few people who were about the same age as the captain came over and asked him curiously. Of course, all Winthrop people know him, Jiang Hai, the reason why you came here is also because of him. At the same time, he is also the richest, most handsome, and most talented person in Winthrop. Most importantly, I heard that he is less than 30 years old. Hearing these people's words, the captain seemed to be afraid that others would mistakenly think that he didn't know Jiang Hai, so he deliberately introduced Jiang Hai loudly. Hearing what he said, many people's eyes lit up. Then you can ask him to let us take a ride on his yacht. Hearing the captain's words, the people here immediately asked, looking at him eagerly. If they go on that yacht, they will have something to brag about when they return home. That won't do, that's Jiang Hai's baby. Let alone you, even we Winthrop people haven't been on it. The captain shook his head. Although he bragged a little too much just now, he wasn't stupid. Asking Jiang Hai to borrow a yacht? It would be strange if he borrowed it. Then why don't you tell us more about Jiang Hai? At this time, some women came over and asked the captain with a smile on their faces. Rich, handsome, talented, less than 30 years old, and a big yacht. This made these women quite curious about Jiang Hai. Regarding the request of these beautiful women, the bearded captain smiled and said, Yes, 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 yes. Although Jiang Hai had been in Winthrop for less than a year, his deeds were very long. First, he came to the United States alone to buy a manor, then he beat up more than a dozen punks in the town alone, then he shocked the world with a beef show, funded the tourism development of the town, and defeated the Boston gang with an M134. Although this was the case, if Jiang Hai heard it, he would probably sweat to death. In the eyes of the bearded man, Jiang Hai had already become an American hero, and the most important thing was that he was very rich and not a playboy. Unlike Iron Man's Tony Stark, he was more like Batman's Bruce Wayne, except that he wasn't as dark. Under the starry-eyed eyes of these girls, the bearded man became happier and happier as he talked. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know this, because he had already controlled his boat and came to his fishing ground. Chapter 505. This will be your home in the future. Don't catch those dolphins, tuna, sharks, and other valuable things. Those lobsters, you can do as you see fit. Stopping the boat in the open sea, Jiang Hai walked out of the cabin and came to the platform. He put his hand in the water, and not long after, the huge head of the giant spear squid emerged from the water. After sending another stream of aura to it, Jiang Hai spoke to it. After this giant spear squid was taken in by Jiang Hai, he gave it a name according to convention. But with Jiang Hai's imagination, it's hard to say what he will name these guys. For example, his family's dog. And the name of this giant spear squid, Jiang Hai decided after thinking about it for 2 days. Okay, let's go, Roger. Finally, he patted the head of this big guy. As his biggest bodyguard in the sea, Jiang Hai waved his hand, and it went deep into the sea. Now it seems that Jiang Hai's sea defense is quite good. With Big Fool and Big Fool's wife, 2 sharks, a dozen dolphins, and the addition of Roger, they should be impregnable. The reason why Jiang Hai called this giant squid Roger, and not giant squid, spear, ink, and so on, was mainly because this guy was a squid found on a pirate ship. Pirates and squids are pirates, and the king of pirates is called Gordy de Roger, so he finally decided to call this giant spear squid Roger. Watching it dive into the water, Jiang Hai also restarted the engine and moved closer to his side of the dock. By the time his boat docked at the dock, Edward Anderson and the others had been waiting for a long time. Almost everyone except Lilia and Bernice was at the dock at this time to welcome Jiang Hai back. After going out for more than half a month, it was impossible to say that they didn't miss him, and they also had a lot of things to report to Jiang Hai. The group of people returned to Jiang Hai's villa in a lively manner, and in the villa, Bernice and Lilia were also there to prepare food. Although it was only morning, everyone had breakfast, and it wasn't time for lunch yet, but it was still good to prepare some snacks. When everyone sat down, Jiang Hai and the others began to give gifts. The best gift for a man is wine, because whether it's a cowboy or a fisherman, it's good to drink. The wine he bought was South American rum. This wine is really good for Jiang Hai to drink, otherwise, he wouldn't have brought it back. 1 box for each person. Jiang Hai's gift is still very generous. As for the women, it's more local souvenirs and the like. Americans like to receive gifts, they don't care if the gifts are expensive or not. Holding the gifts from Jiang Hai and the others, they also can't put them down. After everyone was lively for a while, Jiang Hai announced that a party will be held in the square in front of his house in the evening, and they will have a good meal. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Burke Dollar and Tommy Charles went to work. Harriman and Belle also went back to rest. Even Aphrodite and the others left, because now the grapes are ripe, their work is now the busiest time. In the end, only 3 people in charge were left in Jiang Hai's villa. Robbins Garcia is in charge of the Manor Ranch, Edward Anderson is in charge of the fish farm, and Dulles Gerard is in charge of the wine. The 3 of them have to report to Jiang Hai about the situation of the past few days. Robbins Garcia is the first to speak, because the cows have been sold out, he has the least to do. The cows have been very calm recently, and they are growing well. The last time we concentrated on breeding, 378 cows became pregnant, and with the 986 pregnant cows we have now, it shouldn't be a problem for us to break through the 2,000 calves next year. However, the grass has been growing very fast recently. Should we start preparing to bring in new cows, or get some grass to make into green stock? You can do as you see fit. If we want to buy cows, how many should we buy? Do we still need to recruit more people? Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai thought for a while and decided to delegate the power. He seems to know a lot about raising cows. But in fact, he was just observing. Compared to Robbins Garcia's experience, he was indeed not far behind. The manpower still depends on the cows, because we work very well with those cattle dogs. If we follow the original plan and increase it to 25,000 cows, we don't need to increase the manpower, Robbins Garcia said with a smile as he looked at Jiang Hai. Okay then, let's increase it to 25,000 cows first. After August, September won't be so hot anymore, and we'll start preparing. Looking at Robbins Garcia in front of him, Jiang Hai also nodded. This amount of money was peanuts to him now. There are no problems with the fish farm these days. The main sales aspect is the tourists. Many of these tourists know about our seafood, and some of them didn't know at first, but after seeing others buy it, they joined the ranks of buying. During the days you were gone, we could sell an average of $13,720 of seafood every day. We earned a total of $219,520 these days. Seeing that Robbins Garcia had finished speaking, Edward Anderson reported to Jiang Hai. After all, this was the fish farm's first profit, and most importantly, they had sold more than $200,000 in half a month. $400,000 a month, and nearly $5 million a year, and this was only selling the leftovers. How much would the fish be sold for when they were out? Indeed, in Edward Anderson's eyes, lobsters, abalones, and sea cucumbers were all leftovers. Many of these things were not eaten by them, so naturally, they could not be sold for much in Winthrop. Not bad, keep up the good work. When this month is over, you, Tommy, Eleanor, Andrew, and Marin will each receive a bonus of $20,000. This is what they deserve. Hearing that the business of selling the fishermen was so good, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he said happily. He did not really care about $20,000 per person, but for Edward Anderson and the others, this was a huge sum of money. $20,000 a month, and $240,000 a year. God, they had never even dared to think about it before. Robbins Garcia looked at him with envy. Because when they were selling the cows, they had already received a bonus of $200,000 per person. They had earned no less than the fishermen. I think they'll be crazy with joy when they hear the news. Hearing that Jiang Hai had given them $20,000 each with a wave of his hand, Edward Anderson laughed until he was dizzy. He knew that he did not have to play any tricks in private, because Jiang Hai would definitely not treat them badly. This was also where his confidence came from. Sure enough, as he had expected, when Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marlon Rupert found out about it in the evening, they were so happy that they gathered around and sang and danced. After arranging the manor and the fishery, the last person to speak was Dulles Gerard. Boss, 30% of the grapes in the winery are ripe. These ripe grapes can already be used to make wine, or let them stay on the vine for a while. With the current sunshine, more than 90% of the grapes will be ripe. Should we start making wine now, or wait until then? What do you think? Looking at Dulles Gerard in front of him, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, and decided to ask this professional. Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, Dulles Gerard almost gritted his teeth and said, bear with it. In Jiang Hai's manner, there were two main economic lifelines. One was the ranch, and the other was the fishing ground. This was inevitable. Although Dulles Gerard usually pretended to be indifferent, as if he was a noble and disdained to mix with cowboys and fishermen, in fact, he came here mainly to make money. This was inevitable. He was still very confident about this. On the first day he came here, he felt that this winery, in his hands, could make at least $1.8 million a year. This was the pure profit after excluding all the labor, sales, and so on. In his view, this was already a very profitable business, but these days, he was beaten black and blue. The cows raised by the seemingly inconspicuous cowboys could be sold for $150,000. What kind of cow was this? Was it a beef cow? It was a Taurus. At that time, the Japanese Taurus King was sold for 7.22 million yen, which was equivalent to more than $60,000 now. That was already a sky-high price, so high that it alarmed the Japanese emperor and made the emperor ban the sale of this kind of cow. And Jiang Hai was now selling a cow for $150,000. It was really a cow made of gold, otherwise, it wouldn't be so expensive. And the fishery over there, it seemed to be inconspicuous. Just by casually picking up the leftovers, it could make $5 million a year. If those big fish were to mature, how much would they sell for? Just thinking about it made his scalp tingle. So in the end, the old man panicked a little. In order to prove himself, and for the winery, he was really anxious to make money. But his professionalism told him to endure it. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't care. He didn't mind his subordinates competing with each other to make money, because in the end, he would be the one to benefit. But he minded the bad competition between his subordinates. The things were clearly not ripe and not grown well, but they were directly sold for money. The profits were not maximized, and this was what Jiang Hai couldn't stand the most. Fine work comes out of slow work. I believe in your old craftsmanship. Everything will be done according to your wishes. Looking at Dulles Gerard's slightly tangled gaze, Jiang Hai smiled. He wanted such a professional person in charge. As you wish. Hearing that Jiang Hai had given him the greatest authority, Dulles Gerard was also very touched. It seemed that Jiang Hai was indeed a very good boss, a guy who was worth working for. Chapter 506. Conrad, you can leave the hospital now. In the ward of Boston's Massachusetts General Hospital, a nurse spoke in a sharp voice to the big man who was packing up. This hospital was famous. There were only 3 famous hospitals in Boston. Of course, some small clinics or private hospitals were not included in this list. The 3 most famous ones were Massachusetts General Hospital, Dana-Farber Cancer Center, and Boston Children's Hospital. Among them, Massachusetts General Hospital was the second most comprehensive hospital in the United States. Dana-Farber Cancer Center was the fourth most specialized cancer hospital in the United States. Boston Children's Hospital was the top pediatric hospital in the United States. Of course, this ranking was there for all to see. The prices of the healers were also quite famous. "Oh, thank you." Hearing the nurse's words, the big man who was packing up said in a low voice, "Papaya." Looking at the guy's appearance, the nurse couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. Then, she swayed her big butt and left. The hospital was just like the entertainment industry. Sometimes, it was really hard to see the light, especially when it came to private life. Of course, this was not absolute. There were good people everywhere, but bad people still accounted for the majority. It was the same in the hospital. In the domestic medical system, private life was very messy. It was even more so in foreign hospitals. The United States was a very open country. Thinking about the contents of so many FBI warnings, which were all related to hospitals, it could be roughly understood. Although Massachusetts General Hospital was the second best hospital in the United States, the nurses here were obviously unwilling to be left out. Conrad was more than 2 meters tall and had a body full of muscles. He was treated with the best medicine and lived in the best room. Naturally, he was targeted by many female nurses. However, this guy seemed to be born without love for women. He didn't seem to understand the explicit hints of these women and kept playing dumb. At first, these female nurses were very patient, but later, their attitudes slowly changed. They either ignored him or acted like they did just now. However, these attitudes couldn't change his character. His character was like this. Conrad took his things and left the hospital. As soon as he walked to the door, he saw a police car parked there. "Get in the car." Looking at the police car in front of him, Conrad was a little hesitant. In the end, he went around it and prepared to leave, but the person sitting in the car didn't let him go. Instead, he took the initiative to open the door of the passenger seat and said to him. Hearing this person's words, Conrad couldn't help but glance at this guy. He hesitated for a while before getting into the car. "Where are you going?" "I'll give you a ride." Watching Conrad get in the car, the driver said with a smile. If Jiang Hai were here, he would definitely recognize this person. He had met this person before. This person was called Doyle George. When the Gray Gang in Boston attacked him, this guy had fought side by side with him. However, it was just as Jiang Hai thought. This guy was a gold-plated person, relying on the heroic battle he had fought in the past. He was then transferred back to Boston and became a sheriff. The United States was different from Wuxia. There was no division chief or section chief in the police department. The police ranks here were only divided into police officer, sergeant, superintendent, sheriff, superintendent, and other positions. Of course, each state had different laws, and naturally, the names were different, but the meaning was similar. The position of a sheriff was basically the same as the power of the director of some domestic police stations. If it was in a big city like Boston, it would be similar to the power of the director of a local police station. This also proved how strong Doyle George was. Of course, it referred to the strength of his family. As for him and Conrad, it was mainly because of the battle with Jiang Hai. In that battle, Conrad was shot many times. After a simple treatment by Bernice, he was sent to the hospital. Doyle George also went to the hospital and happened to know this guy. After knowing that he had betrayed Jiang Hai at the last moment, and that was why Conrad's men didn't become hostages, Doyle became interested in him. Gradually, he came to see Conrad. After the two met a few times, not only did they become friends, but they were also very close to each other. Of course, the money for Conrad's treatment was paid for by Jiang Hai. He didn't care about the tens of thousands of dollars, but Doyle George helped him get discharged from the hospital. He also knew about this guy's history. He used to be an underground boxer, which made him want to recruit him into his police force. This was also one of the reasons why he was here. "Thank you." Hearing Doyle George's words, Conrad didn't say the specific location, but just said in a muffled voice, "You don't have to thank me. You don't have to thank me. It was Jiang Hai who paid you, but you still have to be careful in the future. You can't just trust anyone." Hearing his words, Doyle, who had been with him for a long time, naturally knew what he meant. He smiled and said, "Jiang Hai. Benefactor, please take me to Jiang Hai." Hearing his words, Conrad was stunned for a moment, then his gaze became more determined. He originally came to Boston to look for Jiang Hai, but due to a freak combination of factors, he became Jiang Hai's enemy and entered the Grey Gang, almost killing Jiang Hai. And Jiang Hai actually paid for his treatment. In his opinion, he owed Jiang Hai 2 lives. Okay. Upon hearing his words, Doyle couldn't help but chuckle helplessly. However, he knew that this was Conson's habit, so he didn't say much. Instead, he turned the steering wheel and drove towards Winthrop's position. As for Jiang Hai's home in Winthrop, the atmosphere was a bit solemn. Of course, the main solemn ones were Jiang Hai and Bernice, the other 3 were just implicated. "I found that you've been getting more and more out of control recently. Are you infected with some rich boy's habits? Can't you just stay at home for a few days? You've only been out for half a month, and you've only been back for 3 days, and now you're leaving again?" Looking at Jiang Hai, who was eating steak, Bernice put down the knife and fork in her hand and said with a frown, This time I'm really going to discuss business. I'll be back in 3 days at most, at least 2 days." Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai also smiled. In fact, to be honest, if it weren't for the billion, he would be too lazy to go. People who were familiar with Jiang Hai knew that this person was actually very lazy. He liked the kind of monotonous life. He had no interest in the pursuit of excitement, the pursuit of individuality, the search for the warmest place in his heart, and the like. He was not a rich young man, nor was he an artistic young man. His artistic style was not that heavy. Jiang Hai could be summarized as greedy, lecherous, afraid of death, selfish, aggressive, unsympathetic, and without any ideals. It could be said that he was just the most ordinary person among all living beings. With great power came great responsibility, what benefiting the world, what making the earth evolve and advance, what the hell. He was not interested at all, he just wanted to make himself more comfortable, safer, and more enjoyable. This was his purpose. Of course, he also had a bottom line. Other than that, he was just an ordinary young man in society. He was not a genius, he had no ambition, and from the beginning to the end, he did not have any clear goals. Therefore, his sense of immersion was quite strong. The only difference was that he had a dragon ball in his body, that was all. Other than that, he was no different from an ordinary young man. People were afraid of losing. In the past, Jiang Hai did not have anything to lose, the only thing he could lose was his life. Therefore, even ants would drag out their lives, let alone Jiang Hai. Therefore, in the past, Jiang Hai was also afraid of death. However, he estimated that no one would harm him, and now he was also afraid of death, because others had a reason to harm him. His manner, his money, and his identity were all extremely sensitive. Therefore, in addition to bringing bodyguards, he also needed some official things to protect himself. He would speak according to the country he was in. If he was in China, the best way to protect himself would be to contact the higher-ups and make friends with some second-generation officials or third-generation officials. Naturally, he would be able to live a good life. But in the United States, being a government official was useless because the Americans didn't care about government officials at all. If you wanted to survive in the United States, the most important thing was money. In this capitalist society, only money was recognized, not people. Most importantly, just having money wasn't enough because there were people who were richer than you. You had to have something that could save your life, such as oil futures. This was also one of the reasons why Jiang Hai was so careful. He was afraid of death, it was that simple. Forget it, I can't control you. You don't have to explain to me. I am not related to you. You can do as you see fit. She didn't know why, but when Bernice heard that Jiang Hai was going to leave, she couldn't help but feel annoyed. But on second thought, what was there to be annoyed about? She was not related to him, so what was there to be annoyed about? So after hesitating for a moment, she said directly, then lowered her head to eat the steak in front of her. Seeing that she did not speak, Jiang Hai also glanced at her carefully. He muttered in his heart, "Is this girl on her period? Why is she so impulsive? When she heard that I was leaving, it was as if she wanted to eat me. Is there a mistake?" Just as Jiang Hai was muttering there, the doorbell outside rang. Chapter 507. Hearing the doorbell, Jiang Hai was stunned. He walked to the door and picked it up. There were two people standing outside the door. Jiang Hai was familiar with them. One was Doyle George. After all, he had fought side by side with Jiang Hai. After that incident, Doyle was transferred to the Boston Police Department and became a sheriff. He was directly promoted with seniority. It seemed that his family was at least very powerful in the police field. Jiang Hai also had some impression of the other person. He was a big guy. Jiang Hai had seen him 3 times. The first time was in an underground boxing match in Miami. At that time, he beat someone to death and was seriously injured. The second time was on the streets of Miami. He found him interesting, so he invited him to eat a hamburger. At the same time, there was a car accident. Of course, 70% of the treatment fee for this big guy was paid by Zhang Heng. The 4 girls who hit him didn't have much money. Their families could only pay for the basic treatment. The follow-up health care and other expenses, such as the treatment of his original internal injuries, were all paid by Jiang Hai. The third time they met was in his villa. This guy was Jiang Hai's enemy, but for some reason, he betrayed him at the last moment. He saved Alina and the others, giving them time to release Azalina and deal with the invaders. Then he was sent to the hospital. Although Jiang Hai couldn't wait to kill all those who invaded his home, this guy helped him a lot. But after all, this guy had helped him, so Jiang Hai didn't find trouble with him. Instead, he cured him. But now, seeing them come, Jiang Hai was a little confused. What are they doing here? Are they thanking me? This was the most likely reason, but Jiang Hai really didn't know the specifics. "Hey, Doyle, how come you have time to come here?" Looking at the 2 people on the other side of the phone, since he couldn't figure it out, he might as well ask directly. Jiang Hai wasn't the kind of person who liked to keep things to himself. "Hey, man, you're right. I'm very busy. This time I'm mainly here to accompany this big guy. Open the door first, let's go in and talk." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle George said with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't doubt him. He opened the door directly and waited for the 2 in front of the villa. After the door was opened, the 2 returned to the car and then drove into Jiang Hai's manor. After parking the car in the parking lot, the 2 also walked out. Looking at Jiang Hai standing at the door, Conrad couldn't help trembling. He had spent a lot of effort to find Jiang Hai, but fortunately, he finally found him. Come in, come in. Benefactor." Seeing the 2 coming, Jiang Hai also took a few steps forward and greeted the 2 of them, but before he finished speaking, Conrad had already taken a few big steps to the front of the villa, knelt in front of Jiang Hai, and kowtowed heavily to Jiang Hai. After all, this is a concrete floor. As soon as his head touched the ground, it made a banging sound, but Jiang Hai was startled. He immediately jumped down and supported Knerson Peters, who was still kowtowing. What's going on? He didn't understand. Benefactor, do you still remember me? I heard that in Wuxia, you have to express your gratitude in this way. Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said in a muffled voice. Although his brain is not working properly, he is not stupid, at least he can still speak clearly. You don't have to do this. Really, get up quickly. Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile when he felt this guy's immense strength and wanted to kowtow. He had to admit that this guy's strength was quite strong. Judging from Jiang Hai's actions, this guy's strength should be very close to the limit of human strength. But compared to Jiang Hai, he was still far from Jiang Hai's strength, which was 4 times the limit of human strength. Therefore, under Conrad's surprised gaze, Jiang Hai directly lifted him up, which made Conrad extremely surprised. He had never experienced someone being able to lift him up directly in his life. At this moment, he looked at Jiang Hai with a burning gaze. He only admired one kind of person in his life, and that was those who were stronger than him. Jiang Hai had saved his life and was stronger than him. Thinking of this, in Conrad's simple heart, Jiang Hai had already become his benefactor and an object of worship. Who the hell is this? He's so heavy, how can you lift him up? I'm really starting to doubt your genes, brother. Are you a humanoid Tyrannosaurus Rex? Or an alien? Say, what are you doing on Earth? Are you preparing to invade Earth? Seeing Jiang Hai actually lifting Conrad up, Doyle George, who was walking over, could not help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he said in surprise. "Fa, the purpose of my visit to Earth is to settle things with your sister." After helping Conrad stand up, Jiang Hai rolled his eyes at Doyle. After spitting out the word F, he looked at Doyle and said in a mocking tone. "Unfortunately, I don't have a sister. If I did, I would definitely let her marry you. Being targeted by a billionaire, such a wonderful thing must be a great thing for her. Unfortunately, in an open country like the United States, such jokes were not taken seriously by the Americans. Instead, Doyle used this sentence to make fun of him. I can't be bothered with you. Let's go in first." Ignoring this guy's sultry look, Jiang Hai waved his hand and led the two into his villa. In the United States, very few people would invite others to eat at their home. In the United States, there was rarely such a thing. Treating guests to a meal was treating guests to a meal. There was no such thing as a home-cooked meal. Therefore, in the United States, it was rare to see people in other people's homes at noon or in the evening, unless they said that they wanted to treat you to a meal. However, Jiang Hai was not an American. According to the saying of Wuxia people, since they were here, they should eat together. For Jiang Hai's words, Doyle was somewhat not used to it, but he also knew that Jiang Hai was not just being polite, so he did not be too polite. He directly sat at the table, and Conrad also sat there. After Jiang Hai brought them new tableware, he no longer cared about them and started to eat. As for Doyle and Conrad, they also started to eat steaks, but when they had their first bite, their eyes couldn't help but brighten. Conrad only knew that this steak was delicious. But Doyle knew that this steak was not ordinary. Today's steak was not made by Jiang Hai, but by Xiaoya. During the days when Jiang Hai and the others were away, she also studied Western food, although her cooking was still far inferior to those Western chefs. But compared to Jiang Hai, it was already heaven and earth. For Jiang Hai's beef, she naturally knew that it was excellent. If she let Jiang Hai continue to cook like this, it would really be a waste, so now she was also trying to save these steaks. Looking at the two eating without caring about their image, Jiang Hai secretly scolded country bumpkins in his heart. But after thinking about it, this also proved that his beef was really good. Thinking about it, he still felt a little happy. Eat more if you like. I don't have much other things, but this is a game. Chapter 508. Upon hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle George said without raising his head, "Of course, I won't stand on ceremony. You're a tycoon." But Conrad, who was beside him, was stunned for a moment, and then put down the fork in his hand. "What's wrong? Not to your liking?" Looking at him, Jiang Hai was taken aback for a moment, and then asked him. "No, it's delicious, it's really delicious, but I'm not here to eat steak." "Mr. Jiang Hai, you've begged me twice. I, Conrad, don't have much money, nor do I have any ability. I only have a body that isn't afraid of hardship, so I want to repay you." Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said in a muffled voice. But as soon as his voice fell, the people at the table couldn't help but stop what they were doing. In particular, Bernice looked at Conrad in surprise, and then at Jiang Hai. That look made Jiang Hai quite speechless. But at this time, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure to care about her, because after Conrad's voice fell, he couldn't help but feel his chrysanthemum tighten. Is this big guy interested in me? Even if he wants to repay me with his body, it has to be a beautiful woman. What's this? After a few seconds of silence, Jiang Hai said with a smile, I'm a person who doesn't ask for anything in return. No, it's up to you to decide whether you want to accept my gratitude, but it's up to me to decide whether I want to repay it. But Conrad's brain wasn't very good to begin with, so how could he understand this now? He said to Jiang Hai with a serious face. But I really don't need it. Looking at Conrad, Jiang Hai immediately said. At this time, he didn't care whether he would hurt his feelings or not. Jiang Hai had no interest in men. He was a straight man who was harder than steel until he had no friends. Jiang Hai, I think you might have misunderstood what Conrad meant. He doesn't seem to have such thoughts in his mind. He doesn't seem to be interested in men or women. You should know what I'm talking about. When he said that he wanted to repay the debt of gratitude, he seemed to mean it literally. Looking at the determined look on Jiang Hai's face and the fact that Jiang Hai was too anxious to speak, Doyle George couldn't help but wipe the sweat off his forehead. Fortunately, he had interacted with Conrad many times, so he was the only one who could speak clearly now. Upon hearing what he said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth, not knowing what to say. Sigh, someone's thoughts are really dirty. Just when Jiang Hai was feeling a little embarrassed, Bernice also picked up a piece of steak and ate it while speaking proudly. She didn't know who had such a big reaction just now. Dirty my foot. But then again, I really don't need him to repay any debt of gratitude. Scratching his head, Jiang Hai looked at the big guy in front of him speechlessly. If Azalina hadn't appeared, he would have been a very good bodyguard. But now that Azalina and Biyao were around, Jiang Hai didn't need him to be a bodyguard anymore. Moreover, the most important thing is that he doesn't know how to herd animals or catch fish. What use does Jiang Hai have for him? After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle actually understood that Jiang Hai had no use for him. Sigh, I think you probably know a little about his situation. Instead of letting him go out and be used by bad people and die out there, it's better to let him follow you. You're a billionaire now, so you should at least have a bodyguard by your side, right? However, since he and Conrad were acquaintances, it was impossible for him to watch Conrad go down the wrong path again. With Jiang Hai around, he felt relieved. Bodyguard? Okay. Looking at Conrad's anxious look, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, then looked at Azalina. When Azalina nodded, Jiang Hai nodded in acknowledgement of his existence. Thank you, benefactor. I'll do my best to protect you. Seeing that Jiang Hai had agreed, Conrad also stood up excitedly. For him, it was absolutely impossible to not repay a debt of gratitude. Being a bodyguard by Jiang Hai's side was definitely a very good thing for him. As for Doyle George, he could now rest assured. The reason why Jiang Hai accepted him as a bodyguard was actually that he had some ideas. Sometimes, there were some things that Azalina was a woman, after all, and it was not easy for her to do. For example, deterrence. Who was more deterrent, a woman who looked about 1.8 meters tall and capable, or a man who was more than 2 meters tall, strong, fierce, and exuding a murderous aura? Just like what Jiang Hai had said before, he was very afraid of trouble, but if he had a beautiful woman by his side, there might be some idiots who would come for him. However, if he had such a guy by his side, he could probably scare off more than 95% of his enemies. This would have the effect of subduing the enemy without a fight. Jiang Hai was not the kind of person who would take pleasure in trampling on others, although it was indeed a very satisfying thing to trample on others sometimes. However, this matter also depended on the situation. It was very interesting in the early stages, but with Jiang Hai's current strength, if there were any idiots who came looking for trouble, then they would not be trampling on others, but on the brain. As his level increased, the people he wanted to trample on would naturally also increase in level. As for Azalina, she had naturally received Jiang Hai's message, and in fact, she thought so too. With such a strong, deterrent, and simple-minded person who was absolutely loyal to Jiang Hai, it would be a lot easier for her. Besides, Jiang Hai now had a net worth of billions. It was indeed a little difficult to have only one bodyguard, but with this guy, it would be much easier. Since he had agreed to accept him as a bodyguard, Jiang Hai would give him an official identity. After lunch, Jiang Hai called Moses Adams and asked him to prepare a bodyguard contract. The bodyguard's contract was the same as Azalina's, but there were some differences, because Conrad's salary was less than hers. However, Conrad didn't care. In any case, as long as he had food to eat and clothes to wear, he didn't have any concept of money. Jiang Hai gave him a salary of $1,000 a week. Apart from the missions, his base salary for a year was $52,000. Most importantly, he didn't need to pay taxes. Jiang Hai would pay all the taxes, including food, accommodation, and equipment. When he heard Jiang Hai's salary, to be honest, Doyle even wanted to come over and be Jiang Hai's bodyguard. But unfortunately, even if he came over, Jiang Hai wouldn't want him. What ability did he have to eat and wait for death at Jiang Hai's place? The contract was in triplicate and was delivered by Penelope Dahl in the afternoon. This was the first time Jiang Hai saw Penelope Dahl since he came back from Wuxia, but at this time, she didn't seem to have anything to say to Jiang Hai. After delivering the contract and watching Jiang Hai and Knerson Peters sign their names, she went to find her father. This made Jiang Hai feel a little embarrassed. Just now, he greeted her warmly, but in the end, he only got an N. Serves you right. Seeing Jiang Hai eat a turtle, Bernice was very happy and said softly with a smile on her face. Jiang Hai looked at Penelope as she left. He didn't want to disturb her conversation with her father. After all, the misunderstanding between her and her father had only been resolved recently. Actually, it wasn't that Jiang Hai said anything. If it wasn't for the fact that she saw that her father could really earn money from her, she probably wouldn't have bothered with her father. But you could say that she was realistic. She returned the money her father gave her, intact. Jiang Hai didn't know what to say to her, so he could only not be a third wheel. Therefore, after thinking about it for a while, he realized that Knerson didn't have a place to stay, so he went to find a place for Knerson to stay. In fact, it was reasonable to say that a bodyguard should live in the same building as Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai's side was full of women except for him. It was indeed a little inconvenient, so although there were many empty rooms, Jiang Hai didn't let him live here. Jiang Hai's family had a lot of villas for workers. When these villas were first built, the previous owner probably built them with full ranches, full fishing grounds, and full wineries. But he didn't think that Jiang Hai was a little too generous. Logically speaking, a villa had 3 rooms, so 3 people should live in it. As for the wives of the cowboy and the fisherman, they lived separately. Even if they lived together, they lived in one room. But Jiang Hai was different. He divided them according to family. So now there was not a single empty house. In this case, they could only squeeze in. The person Jiang Hai chose was none other than Harriman Fells, because in his manner, he was probably the easiest person to talk to. Sure enough, when Jiang Hai told Harriman Fells about this matter, Harriman happily agreed. He and Conrad were actually the same kind of people. Their brains were a bit slow, but they were tall, exceptionally powerful, and their strength was not small. It was just that their lives were completely different. Conrad was cheated by his friend and went to fight in the underground boxing ring for more than 10 years. In the end, he didn't leave a penny. He was only left with a body full of injuries and terrifying combat power. But Jiang Hai didn't care about these injuries, because his spiritual energy could easily heal those internal injuries. And Harriman, with the help of many kind neighbors, lived peacefully in Winthrop as a cowboy. And he met Jiang Hai, a good boss, so their experiences were completely different. But now that the two of them met, they really felt a little regretful that they hadn't met earlier. Looking at the two who were very satisfied, Jiang Hai was also very satisfied. Standing in front of them, Jiang Hai looked at them. When the two of them stood together, their aura was really a little scary. The two men were more than 2 meters tall, and their bodies were abnormally huge. One of them exercised all year round, and the other herded cows all year round. Their muscles were not small. If they put on a straight face, shave their heads, get some tattoos, wear a black suit, and wear sunglasses. TSK, it would be very cool just thinking about it. In case Jiang Hai went out to negotiate or something in the future, he could definitely bring these two people with him. They could definitely scare a group of people. After settling Conrad down, Jiang Hai returned to his villa. He laid down on the white jade bed and began to think about his next move. Chapter 509. How are you doing here? Lying on a recliner made of jade, Jiang Hai wore sunglasses and looked at the sun in the sky while asking Conrad, who was practicing beside him. Very good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad, who was doing push-ups with all his might, replied in a muffled voice, then continued to train, allowing sweat to drip from his body. Are you having a good time with Harriman? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai continued to ask. Very good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad was still doing his push-ups and continued to say. How are you getting along with the others? Seeing that he still said the same 2 words, Jiang Hai continued to lie there and asked him. Very good. But unfortunately, the answer to Jiang Hai was still the same 2 words. Hey, can't you say something else? Sitting up helplessly, Jiang Hai raised the sunglasses on his face and looked at Conrad helplessly. Does this guy have no other words other than saying, very good? Not bad. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad hesitated for a moment and changed from very good to another word. TCH, waving his hand at him, Jiang Hai continued to lie down. It's very comfortable to bask in the sun here. Today is August 22nd, and it's also the 5th day since Conrad came to Jiang Hai's house. These days, Conrad was still a little reserved when he first came. Basically, he would come to Jiang Hai's villa when he got up in the morning. Wherever Jiang Hai went, he would follow. According to him, he is Jiang Hai's bodyguard. So naturally, he should go wherever Jiang Hai goes, but Jiang Hai is not going to take such a guy with him. So on the 3rd day, Jiang Hai told him that he doesn't need to follow him, and he can do whatever he wants. But he really has nothing to do. After inadvertently seeing the training room in Jiang Hai's villa that is not used except for storms, he told Jiang Hai that he wanted to borrow those training equipment. Jiang Hai naturally had no problem with this. He was happy that this guy didn't follow him, so he immediately lent it all out. He even took the initiative to drive him to the town to pick out a few sets of sportswear. Of course, they were all Nike because these things were not expensive here. According to Jiang Hai, he wanted to let him use the equipment here directly. But Conrad was unwilling. He only took a series of things such as sandbags and dumbbells and moved them to the lawn of the villa. Then he began to practice there. Next to this place was originally the place where Jiang Hai usually basked in the sun. That is, the place where Bernice likes to snatch Jiang Hai's place, but in the next few months, she will not snatch Jiang Hai's place. Because the sun has been too strong recently. Although she also likes to bask in the sun, she is not going to get tanned. So in these 2 days, Conrad no longer followed Jiang Hai, but when Jiang Hai is basking in the sun here, there is always a fierce man training beside him, which makes Jiang Hai a little dumbfounded. But no matter what, he is adapting to everything. Jiang Hai estimated that it is difficult to change this guy's mind. Since he can't change him, he can only let himself adapt. Jiang Hai, aren't you leaving tomorrow? Aren't you going to prepare some luggage or something? Looking at Jiang Hai's leisurely appearance, Bernice, who had just picked some fresh vegetables from the vegetable garden at this time, said with some dissatisfaction. Bernice seems to like staying in Jiang Hai's manor more and more recently. She gave up such a big research institute in Miami and just stayed here with Jiang Hai. Of course, Jiang Hai doesn't care whether she stays here or not. Recently, Little Ya's condition has further improved. Although her appearance is still the same, without a trace of blood like a vampire, she can bask in the sun in the room all day long. Even in the morning and evening, Bernice has allowed her to go out, but from 10 o'clock in the morning, she will be grounded until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. These 6 hours are unshakable, and she needs to slowly adapt. But for Little Ya, this is already great news. It is precisely because she doesn't have to always look after Little Ya that Bernice also walks around the manor all day long. Everyone knows her, and everyone also knows that this woman and Jiang Hai have some unclear relationship. And most importantly, whether it is Delina, Marian, or Aphrodite, they are all a little afraid of her. These people who are close to Jiang Hai don't dare to provoke, the fishermen and cowboys naturally don't dare to provoke them. Even Dulles and his apprentice are respectful to Bernice. Of course, they are more wary of her identity as a doctor. In the United States, the professional status of a doctor is still very high, very high. And this Bernice doesn't know what's wrong with her, but when she saw Jiang Hai lazily sitting there, she couldn't help but get angry. Hey, what's there to pack up? I'm just going for 2 or 3 days. It's not good to let others wait for me on the same day, they are royalty, right? Then I'll do something the next day. And if there's a banquet in the evening, I'll come back on the 3rd day. If there's no banquet, I'll come back directly. Jiang Hai lazily glanced at Bernice, and said in a very tired voice. It's really unbearable. If there's nothing, why don't you go to town and take a look? These tour groups were brought here by you, aren't you worried about any disputes? Why don't you go and see the income of your shooting range? Why don't you go and see the income of your villas? Seeing that Jiang Hai is still half dead, Bernice began to talk with money. But unfortunately, Bernice's words have no meaning. Who told Jiang Hai to not care about money at all? Hey, what's yours is yours, don't force it if it's not yours. If I go, won't the disputes still happen? Moses Adams sent people to watch the villas and the shooting range. I'm not a professional, why should I watch? Glancing at Bernice, Jiang Hai still said slowly. Listening to his words, she really wants to kick him. Who cares if you die? Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Bernice glared at him and walked into the villa. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also changed his position to lie down, but just as he lay down, he saw Conrad's big face. What? Seeing his big face, Jiang Hai was shocked, so he immediately asked him. Boss, if you want to go to Atlantic City, I'll go with you. Looking at Jiang Hai, it was obvious that Conrad's expression was not very clear. Jiang Hai listened to his words and couldn't help but smile. If it weren't for the 5 days of contact, he probably would have thought that this was a confession. No need, you stay at home and look after the house. With a wave of his hand, Jiang Hai directly ordered. But I'm your bodyguard, looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said with a serious face. Protecting Jiang Hai is his duty. I said no need, so there's no need. Why don't we try a fight? Hearing Conrad's words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face. Since he can't talk to him, then he'll use his fists to make him understand this truth. Fight? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad also looked at Jiang Hai strangely. What does this sentence mean? That's right, let's fight. How about this, let's fight. If I win, you'll have to listen to me in the future. You're my bodyguard, right? You'll do whatever I tell you to do. If you win, then you can do whatever you want. Looking at the puzzled Conrad in front of him, Jiang Hai suddenly sat up and said excitedly. Really? Then I can go to Atlantic City with you? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad was also very excited. His big eyes shone with a fierce light. To be honest, the reason he went to the underground boxing scene was partly because he was cheated by his friends, and partly because he really liked to fight. Of course, he would still hold back his strength when fighting with Jiang Hai, but it didn't mean that he would give up fighting. Of course it's true. As soon as Jiang Hai's voice fell, Conrad's big hand came slapping over. On August 23rd, on the road from Boston to New York, Jiang Hai drove his combat spirit. He wore sunglasses and whistled. Feeling the empty car, he couldn't help but sing along with the music on the radio. At this time, in Jiang Hai's manner, Conrad was training hard, but in addition to the muscles on his body, there were some purplish bruises, which also represented the results of his fight with Jiang Hai yesterday. To be honest, when Conrad fought with Jiang Hai, it really scared Jiang Hai at first. After all, this guy had killed people, and that murderous aura was real. Although Jiang Hai had killed people before, it was all in self-defense, and he had never taken the initiative to attack. Therefore, at first, he was really intimidated by this murderous aura, and took a few punches seriously. But then, his physical fitness that was 4 times that of an ordinary person, in addition to his powerful combat power, broke out here. No matter how strong Conrad was, he was just an ordinary person. How could he be a match for Jiang Hai, a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus Rex? In the end, he was beaten up by Jiang Hai. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai was here now, and why he was at home. I'm looking afar, on the moon, how many dreams are flying freely. Jiang Hai sang like this. The car passed through Boston, New York, entered New Jersey, and arrived in Atlantic City. Last time, Jiang Hai came in a hurry and left in an even more hurry, so he didn't have time to appreciate the situation of the second largest gambling city in the United States. This time, he wasn't going to leave like last time. As for Walton, sigh, it was better not to see it if possible. Bam! Just as Jiang Hai was playing and singing along the way, preparing to enjoy the scenery of the gambling city tonight, a car suddenly stopped in the opposite lane, then changed direction and stopped directly in front of Jiang Hai. Chapter 5:10. F***CK, what's the situation? Jiang Hai stepped on the brakes. The quality of Jiang Hai's shield was good. Although he stepped on the brakes, the braking was still quite good. He only slid forward a few meters before coming to a stop. But this shook him a lot. He opened the door with some doubts, and Jiang Hai stretched his head out. In broad daylight, on the road, is there someone who wants to deal with me? Is this person too stupid? Here, the police can come here in less than a minute. What the hell is this? Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, 3 people came down from the opposite car. When he saw these 3 people, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. Because these 3 people, to be exact, he knew them. Ugh, hi, how did I meet you here? Yes, the person who came out of the car at this time was not someone else. It was Walton and the other 2 women, Cheryl Lee and Barbara Martina, who had sex with Jiang Hai that day. When these 3 women came out, Jiang Hai subconsciously knew that the situation might not be good. Not bad, you still remember me. Come out. Walking to the front of Jiang Hai's car door, Walton looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. Then, without giving Jiang Hai a chance to resist, she directly opened his driver's door from the inside, and then pulled Jiang Hai out. Of course, Jiang Hai was afraid of hurting her. Otherwise, with her little strength, how could she pull Jiang Hai? Hey, what are you doing? Looking at her rough actions, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little stunned. What's the situation? You still have the nerve to ask me what I'm doing? Humph, you will know in a while. You 2 go and drive. Let's go back. Glancing at the panicked Jiang Hai, Walton directly opened the back door of Jiang Hai's car, threw Jiang Hai in, and said to the 2 women behind her. The 2 women naturally knew what Walton meant, so one got in their own car, and the other got in Jiang Hai's car. The car started again and went to Walton's home in Atlantic City. Hey, I still have something to do. Hurry up. Feeling the car driving away, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile bitterly. He wanted to explain something, but before he finished speaking, Walton's mouth had already kissed Jiang Hai's mouth. The tongue flexibly invaded Jiang Hai's mouth. Although Walton had little experience in this area, she was much more familiar with kissing and touching than Jiang Hai. After all, there were so many girls for her to train. For a while, Jiang Hai didn't dare to move. He was afraid of hurting Prawalton, but he was so passive that he didn't know what to do. Well, it tastes good. Cheryl, it really has a completely different feeling from you. The smell of sweat on the man's body is quite good after smelling it for a long time. Prawalton raised her head again. There was still a trace of transparent liquid on her and Jiang Hai's lips, but she didn't care. After saying something to Cheryl, who was driving, she kissed Jiang Hai under his surprised gaze. The two communicated with each other for about 10 minutes before Prawalton panted and left. "Hey," I said, "is that enough?" Jiang Hai said speechlessly after wiping his mouth full of saliva. "Enough? How is that possible? Do you think it's possible without a real fight?" Narrowing her eyes, Prawalton slowly climbed onto Jiang Hai's body. She looked at Jiang Hai with narrowed eyes and smiled. Then she grabbed Jiang Hai's weapon. With this grab, Jiang Hai couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This woman wouldn't want to waste him, right? Just as Jiang Hai was about to resist even if it meant hurting her, Prawalton suddenly released his weapon and then bent down clumsily. Feeling her movements, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little confused and a little panicked. He looked at the cars that kept passing by outside the window. To be honest, it wasn't that he hadn't done it in the car before. For example, he had done it with Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen when they were together, but they chose some more remote and quiet places. It was his first time driving while on the road. The feeling of excitement and shyness came together, and it seemed to make Jiang Hai's desire to fight stronger. At this time, Prawalton, who felt that Jiang Hai was different, also raised her head and squatted there with a smile. She took off her black dress from the bottom to the top. In an instant, her naked body appeared in front of Jiang Hai. It seems that she has been prepared for a long time. Then she gently pushed Jiang Hai, motioning for Jiang Hai to lie down, and then she sat on Jiang Hai's body. With a soft moan, the old driver went on the road again. This drifting made Jiang Hai somewhat unprepared. "Hey, are you crazy?" Jiang Hai said to Prawalton in a low voice as he propped up his upper body. "Shut up, just cooperate with me. You don't know how sad you made me these days. I thought it was enough for me to have a woman, but it was you who let me know it. Now, I like it the most, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a look of displeasure as she glanced at Jiang Hai. "Even if you want to do that, you have to go back first. What's going on now?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was really embarrassed, but there were indeed some things that he did. Now that he mentioned it, it was really a bit troublesome. "What's going on? You didn't even tell me that you came to Atlantic City. What's going on?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton bent down while moving and looked at Jiang Hai with a playful expression. "I said, I'm here to discuss business." With a slightly awkward smile, Jiang Hai said somewhat speechlessly. "Then this is my business." Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Prawalton glanced at him and said with a smile. "Don't blame me for this." Looking at her engrossed appearance, Jiang Hai gritted his teeth. If he doesn't hurry up, who knows what will happen in a while. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai also took the initiative to join the battlefield and blew the horn to charge. "Hey, don't move." Feeling Jiang Hai launching a new round of charge, Prawalton was also taken aback. What a joke, she knows Jiang Hai's combat power. If he gets serious, she is no match for him. But Jiang Hai was not going to listen to her. Not only did he launch an attack, but his hands and mouth were also not idle. The instantaneous attack made Prawalton a little overwhelmed, and her body was powerless as Jiang Hai's attack came. On the other side, Cheryl, who was driving, kept looking at the scene in the rearview mirror. This made her subconsciously lick her lips and clamp her legs even tighter. But now that she was driving, she didn't want to have any accidents. But hearing the sound in her ear, she couldn't help but look at the rearview mirror, which could only make her drive very slowly. The drive that was originally more than half an hour took more than an hour to arrive. When the car drove into Prawalton's manor, she was already lying weakly on the steering wheel, and Prawalton was also lying weakly on Jiang Hai's body for the third time. As for Jiang Hai, he had also completed his second attack. Even if his physical fitness was 4 times that of ordinary people, he couldn't help but feel a little tired. Phew, get out of the car. After about 5 minutes, Pula Walton sat up and forcibly pulled out the weapon that was still very strong. Ignoring the liquid that was flowing down from a certain part of his body, he opened the car door and walked out without wearing any clothes. Hey! Looking at her directly getting out of the car, Jiang Hai subconsciously glanced outside. Sure enough, there were people outside. Several women in maid outfits were standing respectfully in front of the car door at this time. They ignored Pra Walton's appearance, but they were looking at Jiang Hai curiously. This made Jiang Hai a little scared, and he subconsciously wanted to take his clothes and put them on, but at this time, Cheryl Lee in the driver's seat had already recovered. After walking to the car door, she grabbed all the clothes in her hand and handed them to the servant next to her. After the servant took the clothes, she directly left. Hey, my clothes! Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai really panicked and immediately shouted at that person. Okay, what's there to shout about? They are all women, what are you shy about? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl glanced at Jiang Hai. It's all this guy's fault. I can't keep my underwear today. It's precisely because they are all women that I have to be shy, okay? I'm not a woman. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was quite speechless. What kind of logic is this? Is there a mistake? Didn't I look at the almanac before going out? Why do I always run into female hooligans? Tisk, with your relationship with Miss Pra, as long as you are willing, they are all yours. What are you shy about? Hurry up and get out. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl looked at Jiang Hai contemptuously, then pulled Jiang Hai out of the car. This Cheryl and Pra Walton were the same. They both had done it with Jiang Hai. Although Jiang Hai was a bit of a bastard, he didn't dare to hurt them. But he really didn't dare to use too much strength to hurt them. But when would it end if he kept pushing and giving in like this? Sighing helplessly, Jiang Hai grabbed the cushion on the seat next to him. No matter what, he couldn't just get out of the car like that. How embarrassing would that be? Covering his vital parts and bending his body, Jiang Hai walked to the car. Just as he got out of the car, Cheryl closed the door. This also cut off Jiang Hai's escape route, unless Jiang Hai wanted to run out naked. Looking at this situation, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. He followed Cheryl into the villa while looking back 3 times with every step. Just as he entered the villa's hall, Jiang Hai was speechless when he saw the situation inside, because at this moment, Pra Walton was lying on a huge sofa in the hall. She was still naked. There were 4 women beside her. 3 of them were beside her. One let her head rest on her long legs and gently massage her head. Another let her legs rest on her legs and gently massage her legs. The last one was squatting in front of her, peeling off the grapes in the fruit plate in front of her. After removing the seeds, she put them in her mouth and fed them to her. Chapter 5:11. The only one who was relatively normal was standing respectfully in front of the sofa. But the most abnormal thing was that everyone, including Pra Walton, was naked. When Jiang Hai walked in, everyone looked at him with some curiosity, some envy, and some excitement in their eyes. Of course, Jiang Hai also knew the excited person. It was Barbara Martina, who was feeding Pra Walton grapes at this time. Hey, Jiang, you're finally here. Miss, have you had enough? Is it my turn now? Seeing Jiang Hai coming over and feeding Pra Walton a grape, Barbara Martina stood up excitedly and wanted to go to Jiang Hai. Hey, I've been holding back all the way. I'll go first. Looking at the excited Barbara, before Jiang Hai had time to speak, he was hugged from behind. He looked back and saw that the person hugging him was none other than Cheryl Lee, who brought him in. He didn't know when she was also naked, hugging Jiang Hai from behind. Oh my God, what the hell is this? Feeling the oppression behind him, Jiang Hai was a little numb. Is my hidden attribute really that of a duckling? Why don't these female hooligans consider my feelings? Hey, at least you have something to look and listen to, unlike me who has to wait here. Hearing what Cheryl said, Barbara couldn't help but yell at her angrily. They would retreat in front of Frau Walton, but she wouldn't in front of others. Then I'll let you look and listen again. Hearing her words, Cheryl wasn't someone to be trifled with. She retorted forcefully. All right, aren't you afraid of making a fool of yourself in front of Jiang Hai? You've all tasted meat, so bear with it. Let the sisters who haven't tasted it go first. It's their first time and they need your support. But at that moment, Frau Walton waved her hand and set the tone. And hearing her words, the three women around her couldn't help but blush and lower their heads. Now, in their hearts, 70% were fear, 20% were doubts, and 10% had some inexplicable feelings. Hey, I'm not a breeder. I'm not here to breed, okay? Have you ever considered my feelings when you say that? Hearing that they had arranged his work, Jiang Hai was a little unhappy and said directly to Frau Walton. And at that moment, Barbara suddenly took the opportunity when Jiang Hai was talking to take his cushion away. Yo, your mouth is tough, but your body is honest. I know your physical fitness. Don't say those useless things. I'll leave it to you. Looking at the cushion being taken away, Frau Walton couldn't help but chuckle. Then, she winked at the three women around her. Although they were unwilling, they still walked over. They couldn't refuse Frau Walton's request. If you don't want to, you can resist. Looking at the three women who walked over, Jiang Hai said to them. But they shook their heads. As for Cheryl and Barbara, they had already squatted down. To them, a feast was on. In the situation where Jiang Hai was powerless to resist, the battle unfolded in the living room. 2 hours later, the battle venue changed to the bathroom. An hour later, it changed to the kitchen. An hour later, it changed to the dining room. After another hour and a half, they returned to Frau Walton's room. He didn't know if it was her original style, or if it was because she came back after seeing Jiang Hai's big bed. Frau Walton's bed was also very big. It was 6 meters wide and 3 meters wide. It wouldn't feel small even if 6 or 7 people slept on it. At this time, Jiang Hai and Frau Walton were lying side by side on her big bed. Jiang Hai's face was somewhat pale. Throughout the day, even when it was time to eat, he had been working hard to farm, even though his body was naturally gifted. He also felt that his waist was a little numb. This feeling was similar to when more than a dozen dolphins came into the manor. Jiang Hai released the aura of more than a dozen scales in one breath. The consumption was really huge. Are you trying to squeeze me dry? Jiang Hai said weakly as he looked at the 3 girls who were still working hard under him. These 3 girls were the ones that Jiang Hai had done something to earlier today. One was called Colin Barlovich, one was called Fail, and one was called Isabel Roland. The last one, Isabel Roland, was Frau Walton's housekeeper. At the beginning, these 3 girls were very shy and afraid of Jiang Hai. They were also unwilling to move too much. As a result, after the first round, Jiang Hai discovered that it was all an illusion. Because he was kind enough to treat these girls, there was some pain in the beginning, but there was no follow-up damage. But who would have thought that this opened the door to a new world in their hearts? They could be considered to have tasted the taste of the marrow, and they had been taking turns to attack. You don't live with us every day. What do you have to be squeezed dry? Really? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Frau Walton rolled her eyes at him, and then touched Barbara who was under her, and Cheryl who was on her chest. They usually played like this. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai was really speechless. Suddenly, Frau Walton turned her head and looked at Jiang Hai curiously. By the way, I heard that the more you use a man's thing, the better it is. Seeing that you are so good, you must have played with a lot of women. How should I put it? Outside hunting, it's not that many times, only 2 or 3, and it's very rare. Specifically, there are some fixed ones, about 3. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't hide anything from her. After all, she knows that Frau Walton likes women, so it is impossible between him and her, so Jiang Hai treats her more as a brother, although the situation between her and him doesn't seem to be so pure. Only a few? Bullsh *T. I have seen the 10 beauties in your manor, and they all like you. Will you do anything to them? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton asked curiously. Cough, I'm still going to get married in the future. Besides, I'm a very possessive person. If they really follow me, I definitely won't let them go. At that time, who would want to be with such a playboy? And I can't marry them, so. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little embarrassed. Don't you have a wife? We have met once. Hearing that Jiang Hai is going to get married, Prawalton was a little surprised. Well, that woman is indeed my wife, but nothing happened between us. Looking at her curious eyes, Jiang Hai thought about it and told her the truth about his love life. Speaking of it, Jiang Hai is really a shame for the rich. He not only doesn't have a proper wife, but he doesn't seem to have many lovers. In addition to Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi, there is only Selena Gomez. And the most important thing is that they are not by his side now. If he needs anything, he has to rely on little left and little right to solve it. It may be because of this that today, Jiang Hai will not refuse anyone. Wow, I didn't expect your life to be so complicated, but your life is a failure. Do you know how many women I have? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a smile. I don't know. Discussing with a woman who has just fought with him how many women he has slept with, Jiang Hai is really. What the hell, this strong sense of contradiction is really not comparable to ordinary people. I should have had 517. Looking up at the ceiling, Prawalton thought for a moment and said. Me? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. More than 500? Is it that exaggerated? The 5 of them are my wives, and will always stay by my side. However, women will get tired of looking at them all the time. So, I will still look for new women all over the world. They will also help me find things. Looking at Jiang Hai's surprised look, Prawalton said with a smile. Looking at her smug look, Jiang Hai really wanted to slap her to death. I have played with beauties all over the world, the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Japan, Korea, Wuxia, Soviet Russia, England, France, Germany. I have even played with North Korea and Africa. The women in each place are different. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton also excitedly talked about her love history. As for Jiang Hai, listening to her words, he had no other way but to smile awkwardly. He is really a rookie. Do you know where the women are the most delicious? As if she didn't see Jiang Hai's embarrassment, Prawalton said excitedly. I don't know. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai really didn't know this. South Korea is the most fun. Seeing that Jiang Hai really didn't know, Prawalton didn't keep him in suspense and said with a serious face. South Korea? Hearing her words, the first thing that came to Jiang Hai's mind was the South Korean girl group. Her looks were indeed good and her figure was great. But when he thought about the most famous thing in South Korea, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. They are very beautiful and have good figures, but don't you find that they look a bit alike? Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai looked at her and said with a smile, but as soon as his voice fell, Cheryl raised her head and glanced at him, which made Jiang Hai a little overwhelmed again. He forgot that there was still Cheryl. But Cheryl should be real. At least, Jiang Hai didn't feel any artificial traces on her. She is a natural beauty. I just want you to fight with them, not marry them. What are you worried about? Glancing at Jiang Hai, Prawalton directly refuted Jiang Hai's words, and Jiang Hai thought about it. It seems that she is right. Chapter 5:12. At night, the summer wind blew gently, taking away the heat in the room, and at the same time, it also took away that trace of strange smell. When it was midnight, Jiang Hai, who was sleeping in the middle, suddenly opened his eyes and glanced at the girls who were sleeping soundly beside him. Jiang Hai slowly got up. Because there were no clothes here, Jiang Hai could only walk out of the room with a bath towel wrapped around his waist. As soon as he walked out of the door, Jiang Hai couldn't help stroking his waist. What the hell, I won't be envious of those male protagonists anymore. It's really too tiring. It seems like our country's monogamy policy is not to protect the rights of women, but to allow men to live longer. After moving his body, Jiang Hai sighed. Since Walton got in his car, he had hardly stopped. In the car, he fought Walton twice. Here, he fought Colin Bavrovic, Fail Ferrio, and Isabelle Loren. Then, he fought Cheryl and Barbara. Then, he fought Walton. Then, he fought Colin Bavrovic, Isabelle Loren, and Fail Ferrio. It could be said that today, Jiang Hai didn't do anything else but fight. He fought a total of 13 times. Of course, the number of times these women fought was no less than that of Jiang Hai. After all, their fighting strength was not as good as Jiang Hai's. Jiang Hai had no problem fighting 2 of them at the same time. But fighting 6 of them at the same time, he was somewhat powerless. After all, he wasn't a professional. After patting his waist, Jiang Hai went downstairs to the bathroom. After going to the bathroom, he went to the kitchen. He had fought so many times today, including in the kitchen, so he didn't eat seriously. No one's body could stand it if he only ate and didn't eat, so now he had to find something to eat. However, after opening the refrigerator in the kitchen, Jiang Hai was depressed. There was nothing but wine and drinks. That's not right. If there's no food here, what did I eat for dinner? Looking at the full plate in front of him, but there was nothing to fill his stomach, Jiang Hai couldn't help but mutter in a low voice. We don't store leftovers here. What we eat every day is freshly made, whether it's bread or other things. Vegetables and meat are only bought on the same day, so there's nothing in the fridge. Just as Jiang Hai was struggling to listen, a voice suddenly sounded beside him. Jiang Hai looked back and found that Isabelle Roland had unknowingly run to his side. Compared to Jiang Hai, who shyly put on a bath towel, she was much more direct and naked. What the hell? You scared me. If you don't put anything in the fridge, where do you put it? Looking at the French beauty beside him, Jiang Hai was really shocked, but then he thought about it. What's there to be afraid of looking for food, so he asked her. Come with me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Isabella took out 4 bottles of beer from inside and walked outside with Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at her movements and couldn't help but be a little puzzled. What is she doing? Before Jiang Hai could react, she had already opened the door of the villa. Then 2 women in maid outfits appeared at the door. When they saw Isabel come out, they couldn't help but nod to her, indicating that they were greeting her. Prepare some supper for me. By the way, what do you want to eat? After saying something to the girl outside, Isabella looked at Jiang Hai. It seemed that she was no stranger to ordering food with her body naked. She should have done it a lot in the past. Anything is fine. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was still a little shy, but he whispered in the dark. I remember that the people in the northeast of Wuxia like to eat kebabs. Let's do it like this. After thinking for a while, Isabella ordered the maid in front of her, then closed the door, and then took Jiang Hai to the balcony on the 2nd floor of the villa. She walked straight out of the villa and came to the balcony. At this time, there were a few chairs on the balcony. The chairs were made of real leather, and they were quite big boss chairs. Although Isabella was not short, about 1.75 meters, she was very thin, and when she sat on it, she sank into it. There were some blankets and the like on the chair, so she walked straight to the chair, curled her whole body into it, and then pulled the blanket over her back. She didn't have any movements to hide the moon and a certain brown forest in front of Jiang Hai, but it made Jiang Hai a little overwhelmed. Following her in, Jiang Hai also sat on an old chair, pulled the blanket over his body, and didn't know what to say. Although we have already done that kind of thing, we don't seem to be very familiar with each other. Let me introduce myself. My name is Isabelle Roland. I am the housekeeper of this manor and one of Miss Pulla's girlfriends. Of course, things like serving in bed are our honor. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't speak, Isabella opened a bottle of Budweiser beer alone. After taking a sip, she took the initiative to talk to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also moved his mouth and opened a bottle of beer. Well, my name is Jiang Hai. I am from Wuxia. I am now running a manor in Boston. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also introduced himself. In fact, he guessed that these girls knew about his situation. As expected, the moment he finished speaking, Isabel had already said, I know you. Your beef is the best. This batch of beef made Pulla earn a lot of money and made her position in the family rise significantly. She was very happy during those few days and even specially organized a party for a week. Unfortunately, at that time, you didn't have this kind of relationship with us. Otherwise, you could have joined as well. Just the party alone invited dozens of famous models and many socialites and outsiders. Hundreds of women openly organized a party here and the atmosphere was quite good. If you came, you would have a great advantage. Isabella said while throwing a flirtatious glance at Jiang Hai. This almost made Jiang Hai choke to death. He almost couldn't handle 6 of them, and hundreds of them. But thinking of that scene, humph. He still wanted to live for a few more years. Ahem, I have a doubt. To be honest, do you really like women? If it's true, why didn't you resist when she asked you to accompany me? Since there was no way to continue this topic, Jiang Hai could only change the topic. But this matter was also the most puzzling point because he could see the resistance in these girls' eyes at the beginning. Resist? Why should we resist? Anyway, we just do what Miss Pulla told us. She won't harm us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Isabella said calmly. What's the situation? Looking at Isabella's appearance, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why do they believe in Pra Walton so much? What confidence do they have to be in her hands? Or is it because they have such a tendency? To us, Pulla is not just a simple partner. In our eyes, Miss Pulla is our sky, our god. We will not do anything to disobey her or make her unhappy. As long as she asks us to do so, even if she asks us to die, we will not blink our eyes. Moreover, in the beginning, when we were with you, we were indeed a little scared. But after that, it felt pretty good. We have never experienced this feeling before. Looking at Jiang Hai, Isabella said with a smile, but her words made Jiang Hai even more curious. What kind of feeling is this? Let me tell you a story. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Isabella chuckled and then told a story to Jiang Hai. This story was a bit melodramatic but very simple. This story happened in the middle of France. The girl in the story originally had a happy family, but her father drank something because he made a mistake with a bad friend. In the end, the family was broken. He also fell ill once, but he did not have the money to buy medicine. As a result, he robbed a store. When he went out, he happened to meet the police and was directly shot to death. After this incident, the girl's mother took the girl away from the small town and went to a nearby city. She married a stepfather with a bad temper and an extreme alcoholic. At first, it was nothing more than some beatings and scoldings, which the girl could endure. But when the girl was 14 years old, the stepfather actually wanted to rape her. She desperately escaped and called the police. The police took her stepfather away, but her mother scolded her for being a jinx. Because of her, the family that her mother had rebuilt with great difficulty was broken again. One night, her mother left the house with her younger brother. At the age of 14, she had no choice but to find a job in order to survive, but she was targeted by a group of hooligans. These hooligans had snuck into her house with the intention of harming her. When she was escaping, she accidentally fell down and was caught by these hooligans. Just when she thought that her life was going to end just like that, she suddenly remembered something. A woman descended from the sky. Her bodyguards knocked down these hooligans and gave them the punishment they deserved. She followed this woman to the United States, followed this woman, received higher education, and became one of this woman's girlfriends. To this girl, this woman was her everything, her god. No matter what, as long as she still wanted her, she would do anything. This was Isabella's story. Jiang Hai sat at the side and listened to this slightly melodramatic story. However, he knew that this should be true. The women in this story should not be Isabella and Prawalton. You can ask the other 4 stories if you have time, but they are basically similar to this. When the story was finished, the table in front of Jiang Hai and Isabella suddenly split open. A plate of barbecued meat rose from below and appeared in front of them. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.